Chapter 270. That's a bunch of nonsense. The young man was enraged by Jiang Pingji's words. It was hard for him to maintain his elegant demeanor. Jiang Pingji snorted. She looked at Master Yuanjing, and then at the young man named Zuda. She mocked. You said that I'm talking nonsense, but why don't you take a look at what's in your head? The sage said that the people are more important than the king. If the king is like this, how can the gentry be more important than the people? You said that I rely on my ancestors, but you can argue with me here, because you have a good ancestor, right? Jiang Pingji did not like the young man named Zuda. She realized that not only did he have the heart of a saint, but he was also retarded. The young man was speechless. Jiang Pingji spoke again, but this time, she was not talking to the young man. She was asking Master Yuanjing. I thought that Master Yuanjing was famous, so he should be very careful when he accepted disciples. How could he be so old and blind that he accepted such an extreme and stubborn blockhead as his student? She did not hide her disdain for the young man when she said that. This time, the young man was so angry that he couldn't even speak a word. His face was flushed red. He did not care how Jiang Pingji attacked him, but he could not let her implicate his respected teacher. Master Yuanjing was not angry. Instead, he looked at Jiang Pingji meaningfully. Humans are not perfect. Even saints are like this, let alone ordinary people. As a teacher, you need to know that teaching is not discriminatory. Then you can teach and solve doubts. Although Zuda is wrong, he has his merits. How can you just look at one side and deny everything about him? If what you said is true, Langyi Academy should be empty. I'm not a perfect teacher, and I'm not qualified to be a teacher. It was because of his shortcomings that he needed to learn. It would take more than 1 or 2 days to correct, not to mention a well-formed temperament. Master Yuanjing said calmly. There was even a smile on his face that made Jiang Pingji feel uncomfortable. If one had to describe his smile, it would be cunning. Master Yuanjing was respected by the people and the students. It was not only because he fought for the 3 cities from the royal court of the north borderline when he was young, nor was it because he was knowledgeable. More importantly, it was because he treated his students equally. Whether it was the son of a noble or the descendant of a peddler, in his eyes, a student was just a student. He would not look up to a student because he was outstanding or had a noble background, nor would he look down on a student because he was stubborn or had a lowly background. As long as their nature wasn't bad, their roots weren't rotten, and there was still room for improvement, then they were worthy of his careful guidance. Jiang Pingji said, You're quite protective. Mr. Yuanjing said calmly, Zuda's nature isn't bad. He's just a little paranoid, but he can still change. Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes and said, Oh! She suddenly raised her hand and pointed at the 2 people who were still in the hot spring and did not dare to come out. In your opinion, what do you think about these 2 people? When she asked this question, many people who were watching the show pricked up their ears, and the person in question even had his heart in his throat. Being targeted by Lu Shi meant that they were not fated to be officials. But if Mr. Yuanjing praised them, there was still a chance. Mr. Yuanjing suddenly smiled. He raised his hand and stroked his gray beard. His eyes were a little bright. It was said that one's eyes could reflect one's true age. Mr. Yuanjing took good care of himself, but he still looked like he was in his 30s or 40s. His eyes were clear and bright, with a deep wisdom. It was impossible to guess his real age just by looking at his eyes. Mr. Yuanjing had seen people who held grudges and aggressive people, but it was rare to see someone like Jiang Pingji. He said, looking at his behavior, he has a dignified appearance and is made of gold and jade. Looking at his inside, he has a belly full of rubbish and is rotten inside. Are you satisfied with this answer, Lang Jun? Lu Shi alone would not let the 2 young men have an easy time, but she dragged him into this mess. She was trying to push them to the edge of death. Really, she was evil, he thought. How could Mr. Yuanjing not see that he was being used by Jiang Pingji? But he did not like to be calculative with the younger generation, so he did not expose her. Mr. Yuanjing's evaluation was like a bolt from the blue to the 2 young men's ears. Although they were in the warm, hot spring, they felt like they had fallen into an ice cellar. A terrifying chill spread from the soles of their feet to the top of their heads. Lu Shi had cut off their path to fame. Mr. Yuanjing's evaluation was enough to make them lose their footing in Dongqing. Jiang Pingji smiled with satisfaction. Her eyes were slightly curved like the bright crescent moon, which was similar to Mr. Yuanjing's. I drank too much just now. Please forgive me if I offended you. Mr. Yuanjing shook his head helplessly. She was taking advantage of the old man's age, but he was not blind. He could see clearly whether Jiang Pingji was really drunk or pretending to be drunk. It's okay. It's just that drinking hurts the liver. It's better for young people to drink less. Zuda, let's go. I'm sorry, master. I was rude today, so you were put in a difficult position by a kid. After leaving the waterside pavilion, the young man named Zuda hung his head low like a rooster who had lost a fight. He was unhappy. Mr. Yuanjing folded his hands in his wide sleeves. His footsteps were leisurely, as if he was taking a stroll in the park. Zuda, look at that young Langjun. What do you think of him? The young man turned his face away. He was still angry. He has a sharp tongue and a bunch of crooked reasoning. Mr. Yuanjing did not comment. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "What else?" The young man was speechless. He could not say anything else for a long time. Mr. Yuanjing sighed and said, "You were blinded by anger and resentment, which affected your judgment. This is a taboo for a strategist. You can't judge a person by his appearance. You have to observe his words and actions carefully. You have to find out the reason behind it. Otherwise, even if that young Langjun is a dragon among men, you won't be able to see him. Isn't it a pity?" He spoke calmly. His tone was like he was talking about family matters and not lecturing a student. The young man was not convinced. "Did you say that the young man is a dragon among men? Such a high evaluation?" Mr. Yuanjing stopped and turned his head to smile at the young man. "Not even one in a million." The young man was speechless. "It's just that this person is too stubborn and easy to break. His temper is so flamboyant. It's easy for him to get into trouble." Mr. Yuanjing pondered and sighed. He's like a piece of unpolished jade. Although he has natural beauty, he hasn't been carefully carved. People don't know his inner qualities, so they treat him like a stubborn stone. More importantly, she had the mandate of an emperor, but she was a girl. Mr. Yuanjing secretly raised his eyebrows when he thought about that. The old man was not blind. He could tell if Jiang Pingji was a boy or a girl. Since Mr. Yuanjing was so sure about Jiang Pingji, the young man could calm down no matter how unconvinced he was. He looked at her objectively. He muttered and felt slightly wronged. "I'm blind. I only see that this person is arrogant and bullying the weak." Mr. Yuanjing smiled like a naughty child and teased him. "So, I'm your teacher and you're my student." The young man was speechless. Chapter 271. Since Master Yuanjing was bringing a few students with him, the hot spring that he had requested was very big. There was even a smaller companion spring inside. There was a pavilion, a terrace, and a waterside pavilion. It was enough for the master and his students to have fun. This was also the most luxurious private room in the hot spring hotel. If he wasn't Master Yuanjing, who was famous in Dongqing, he wouldn't have been able to get such a good room. Zuda accompanied Master Yuanjing back. When he was about to open the door for the master, he saw Master Yuanjing wave his hand with a playful expression. "Listen, is there anything strange?" The young man Zuda was confused. They didn't go to the wrong room. Why was the master keeping them in suspense? "Master, what's wrong?" Master Yuanjing smiled and said, "Usually they follow the rules and etiquette, but they like to play around in private. When I'm not here, how can it be so peaceful if they don't play around? Therefore, there should be a distinguished guest. Zuda, what do you think of my appearance?" The young man choked and then said seriously, "Master, you are handsome and spirited. You don't lose to the young people." Master Yuanjing nodded in agreement and said, "I think so too." The young man was speechless. He opened the door with the air of a knowledgeable scholar. His clear eyes scanned the inner room, and he understood. He saw the person he expected and said, "I haven't seen you for many years. How have you been, Chief Lu?" Because of Gu Min, the Lu residents and Master Yuanjing had some connections. The two families had contact with each other. Even though Gu Min had passed away many years ago, The second wife didn't forget to send gifts to Master Yuanjing during festivals. The two families had a good relationship. The distinguished guest that Master Yuanjing mentioned was no doubt Lu Shi. As for Feng Run, he was just there to join in the fun. The teacher secretly glanced at a few of his students. They were well behaved because Lu Shi and Feng Run were there. Each of them was acting like a gentleman. One of them was reciting, 2 of them were competing, or 3 of them were discussing poetry collections in secret, whispering to each other. They were quite good at bluffing. Lu Shi had been waiting for a while. When he saw Master Yuanjing finally appear, he couldn't help but feel relieved. To be honest, this hot spring room was poisonous. Any student who mentioned it seemed to be famous in history, or unofficial history. He felt a little pressured. He went forward to greet Master Yuanjing, and the 2 of them sat down. Before Lu Shi could speak, Master Yuanjing said, "I know why you're here, County Chief Lu." Lu Shi opened his mouth and swallowed the polite words he wanted to say to warm up the situation. He asked, "Since that's the case, what do you think?" The other students seemed to be very serious, but in fact, all of them pricked up their ears to listen to the purpose of County Chief Lu's visit. "I have said before that I will accept 4 people as my disciples according to fate. A while ago, I had already accepted a filial disciple, for people have reached the age limit, so I will not accept any more disciples. Your son is a dragon among men. If you don't mind Langi Academy, you can come and study here. You are most welcome." Master Yuanjing shook his head, but he did not look regretful. "Moreover, even without Zixiao, your Langjun and I are not fated to be master and disciple." Lu Shi felt a little annoyed. He hadn't said anything yet, but the old man in front of him had already said everything he could. However, he didn't force it. His initial plan was to go to Langi Academy and leave everything else to fate. Now, it could be said that his wish had been fulfilled. "That's good. Then I'll temporarily entrust this mischievous son of mine to Mr. I hope Mr. will take good care of him." Master Yuanjing said half-truthfully, "Your son is full of anger. If I don't take care of him, my Langi Academy will be overturned." Lu Shi's facial expression changed slightly when he heard that. If others heard Master Yuanjing's words, they would definitely think that Master Yuanjing despised Lu Shi's son for being naughty or difficult to discipline. But Lu Shi understood what Master Yuanjing was implying. Master Yuanjing and Master Liaochen seemed to be able to see that Lanting's fate was extraordinary. Master Liaochen once said that there were less than 5 people in the 5 kingdoms who could see the emperor's aura around Jiangpingji. However, his daughter seemed to be unlucky. Not only did she meet Master Liaochen, but she also met Master Yuanjing. "Haha, I am not a talkative person. You can rest assured, County Chief Lu." Master Yuanjing saw through Jiangpingji's physiognomy, but he did not expose her. Instead, he quietly covered up for her. It was obvious that he did not have the same opinion as others. According to the scholar's point of view, a woman with the emperor's fate was a demoness who brought disaster to the country. At their level, they had already broken away from the restrictions that ordinary people had. Otherwise, how could they be called masters? Many times, even if they saw something, they would keep quiet. Lu Shi forced a smile. "If Lanting is really so naughty and overturns your academy, the Lus will help you rebuild the academy even if we have to spend all our fortune." Master Yuanjing stroked his beard and said, "County Chief Lu, I am looking forward to it." Lu Shi was speechless. Looking forward to it?" At that moment, Master Yuanjing added, "The roof of the east wing was blown open by the strong wind last time. The students are not good at repairing it, but it still leaks every rainy day. If you really help the academy rebuild it, the children will not have to climb up the roof." Lu Shi was speechless. "I can't believe you are this kind of Master Yuanjing." In Lu Shi's mind, Master Yuanjing should be as bright as the moon. He should be a noble person who was hard to get in touch with. Now that he met him, how should he put it? It felt like his idol had been shattered. It seemed that Master Yuanjing was too down to earth. Feng Run, who was beside Lu Shi, was also stunned as if he had been struck by lightning. No one would have thought that Master Yuanjing, who was said to be otherworldly, was like an old child in reality. If that's the case, I will go and call my son here so that you can take a look at him. Master Yuanjing smiled and said, There is no hurry. I have just seen the little Langjun outside. He is indeed a bright and healthy child. There is no need to trouble you, County Chief Liu. I will let my students run errands for you. Why don't you play a game with an old man like me? For some reason, when Lu Shi heard Master Yuanjing talk about his daughter like that, he suddenly felt uneasy. It was understandable that he had a bright and clean face. But where did he see that he was healthy? Not only was Lu Shi confused, but the young man from Zuda University, who followed Master Yuanjing, was also confused. How could that rude teenager be the Langjun of County Chief Liu? Then I will have to trouble you. Lu Shi looked calm, but he felt a little uneasy. He felt that his daughter was stirring up trouble again. Zuda, go and make the arrangements. I will have a game with County Chief Liu. Everyone knew that Master Yuanjing was proficient in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. But his students knew that Master Yuanjing loved to play chess. He would often play chess and entertain himself for the whole night. Master Yuanjing held a black chess piece with his back facing the door. It was as if he had eyes on the back of his head. He said to the young man who had just crossed the door, Zixiao, go and call for the number 3 Tianzi room in the Fenghe courtyard. Tell her that the little Langjuan's father wants her to come here. The young man seemed to have just finished bathing. His black hair was wet and his shoulders were wet. Hearing his master's order, he didn't doubt it. He lowered his eyes and agreed. That little friend is also Master Yuanjing's student? Lu Shi looked up and almost threw the chess piece. He even forgot to ask a question. Chapter 272. Master Yuanjing smiled and asked Lu Shi, You mean Zixiao? I took him in a while ago, so it can be said that I have made up for my regret. By the time he finished speaking, the young man had already turned around and left, leaving behind only a slightly thin and tall silhouette. Lu Shi's eyes widened, as if he had thought of something. After a long while he said in a low voice, So, he is Mr.'s 4th disciple. His appearance is indeed extraordinary. Although he said that, he was secretly suspicious. When did Wei Zixiao become Yuanjing's disciple? He was bewildered, and his eyes darkened. Wei Xi was from Langia, and was also studying in Langia. However, due to the changes in his family, he left Dongqing with his entire family. Master Yuanjing squinted his eyes. His cold gaze seemed to have seen through everything. Seeing Lu Shi's reaction, he said meaningfully, Originally, I couldn't have accepted this disciple. Although we were destined to be master and disciple, we were not master and disciple. Lu Shi's hand that was holding the chess piece paused. His face was filled with curiosity and suspicion. If that's the case, why did you accept him as your disciple? You don't know this, but Zixiao has a knot in his heart. This also causes him to be intelligent, but he also likes to get into a dead end. If he's not careful, he'll step onto the wrong path. In the past, I wanted to take him as my disciple twice, but he refused both times. Now that he is willing to be enlightened, I am naturally overjoyed. To Yuanjing, there was nothing more gratifying than seeing a promising seedling untie the knot in his heart and grow strong and healthy. Lu Shi was completely dumbfounded, as if he had just heard a heavenly book. There had always been others chasing after Yuanjing to be his disciple. How could there be someone who could make Yuanjing chase after him? Wei Xi, Amin only said that he was a good strategist. Simply put, they were the prettiest among the smart, and the smartest among the beauties. This was a man who used his face to brush official history, and his schemes only appeared in unofficial history books. So, Master Yuanjing, are you sure you're not joking? To be loved by Mr. so much, he must not be weak in any aspect. Lu Shi tried his best to maintain his composure, so that he would not reveal any flaws. Of course, Zixiao, it's IKEA. Lu Shi and Feng Run, who was watching the game, were speechless. Wait, IKEA, are you sure there's nothing wrong with this description? Dong dong dong. Jiang Pingji was lazily soaking in the hot spring. A neatly folded towel rested on her forehead. Her long black hair was fixed at the top of her head with a hairpin, revealing her slender and fair neck. Her skin was covered with water droplets. Because of the fog, it was as if she had a filter on her entire body. Although she was still wearing clothes, The audience in the live broadcast room expressed that they could not take it anymore. Sugar-fried chestnuts. #perverted. I really want to climb in and have a bath with the streamer. Streamer Zhengzheng Shanghua. There are always unruly people who want to compete with me for the streamer. Hearing the knock on the door, Jiang Pingji opened her tipsy eyes. There was a faint blush on her face from the steam, as if she had applied a layer of top-notch powder on it. Did the maidservant bring the wine? She raised her eyebrows and said lazily, "Come in. Just leave the wine by the side of the pool." Outside the house, Wei Ci, who had obtained permission, opened the door slightly. Hot and humid air blew into his face, and his vision was filled with white mist. The audience in the streaming room was the first to notice the abnormality. At that moment, Jiang Pingji was still lazily half-lidded. One chestnut. Host, stop sleeping. There's a strange man coming in. Be careful. Lao Siji Lianmeng. It's a man, not a maidservant. Host, don't sleep over. Be careful not to be taken advantage of. Wei Feng Tang Tang. Host, stop sleeping. Get up quickly. Someone reminded Jiang Pingji. Naturally, there were also people who noticed the strange man's appearance. But in a flash, the bullet screen full of infatuated fans covered all the reminders. It was an unprecedented grand occasion. Looking at the changes in the bullet screen, Jiang Pingji frowned slightly. She did not need to turn her head to guess the person's magnificent appearance. The audience in the streaming room did not have any other good points, but they had a normal sense of beauty. Not every beautiful face could make them lick the screen. You seem to have entered the wrong door, Jiang Pingji said without turning her head. She supported herself with both arms by the side of the pool and relaxed her whole body. The strange man outside did not come in. Instead, he lowered his head and spoke in a low voice. His voice was between a teenager and an adult. I am Wei Ci. Your father has summoned you to Tianzi room number 1 in the Rose Garden. Hearing that, Jiang Pingji suddenly turned her head to look at the man. She asked, Are you talking about my father? Wei Ci's body stiffened imperceptibly. He suddenly lowered his head and immediately returned to normal. It was as if the abnormality had never occurred. He said with certainty, Yes, your father is playing chess with my master. He specially ordered me to come over and pass on the message. Jiang Pingji secretly rubbed the area between her eyebrows. Although it was very comfortable to soak in the hot spring, one could not soak in it for too long. Why are you so reserved, Lang Jun? Wait a moment. I will go with you after I tidy up. It's okay. Help yourself. The next second the door closed again. There was a vague shadow at the door. It was obvious that the person had not left. Seeing that, Jiang Pingji frowned but did not say anything. Climbing out of the hot spring, she temporarily closed the streaming room. After a simple wipe, she changed into a dry robe. After doing all that, she reopened the streaming room and pushed open the paper door at the same time. She said to Wei Ci, who was kneeling at the door, Please lead the way, Lang Jun. At that moment, without the cover of the fog, Wei Ci's appearance was clearly visible to her. Seeing him in person, she could understand why the look-alike person in the streaming room was so excited. His long black hair was warm and damp. It draped over his shoulders, leaving wet marks. The ends of his hair were dripping with water droplets. His face was like jade, and his skin was like fine porcelain. Because of the heat, his cheeks were a little flushed, giving people a slightly intoxicated feeling. His hair was like a knife, his eyebrows were like ink, and his pure black eyes were cold and calm. When he looked at Jiang Pingji, he did not reveal the slightest emotion. It was as if he had emptied his mind, not to mention anything else. Just this alone made Jiang Pingji feel that it was interesting. It seemed that she had just met this young man for the first time. Why did he have such a high level of vigilance against her? Her eyes turned, and a plan came to her mind. Jiang Pingji knelt on one knee and moved slightly closer to the young man. Her pair of eyes that seemed calm could not help but ripple. If it wasn't for the fact that you have an Adam's apple and don't have ear piercings, I would have thought that you were a young lady. You actually came to the hot spring alone. Wei Ci's face was cold. He leaned back slightly and distanced himself from Jiang Pingji. He frowned slightly in displeasure. Young Lang Jun, this joke is a little too much. I don't like people talking about my appearance for fun. Jiang Pingji stood up and crossed her arms in front of her chest. I was obviously praising you for your good looks. Wei Ci pursed his lips tightly and stood up to lead the way. He said coldly, I am a man. It is really rude to compare me with a woman. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Oh, he has quite a temper. Lanting. A familiar yet slightly doubtful voice interjected. Chapter 273. TSK. I was wondering who it was. So it's the famous Fenger Langjun. It's really easy to find traces of you. Jiang Pingji walked to the side of the corridor, which was separated from Feng Jin by a pond. The two of them conversed through the air. Feng Jin felt wronged. He did not know that Jiang Pingji would be in Shangjing at that time. If he had known earlier, he definitely wouldn't have come out to soak in the spring with his classmates. Just now, when he was leaning against the railing and looking into the distance, he suddenly saw a familiar figure. He thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him, but he didn't expect that it was really his friend. I haven't seen you in a few months. Lanting's glib tongue has only increased. You're able to pin a groundless crime on me without any hesitation. Feng Jin smiled. At that moment, a classmate beside him called out to him. Feng Jin apologetically said to Jiang Pingji, Lanting, please don't blame me. We'll catch up later. After Jiang Pingji greeted him, she realized that Wei Ci was looking coldly at Feng Jin's back as he turned around. I just met an acquaintance. Wei Langjun, please lead the way. Wei Ci withdrew his gaze and did not say a word. One after the other, they soon arrived at the Rose Courtyard Sky Room 1. Lanting, come here. This is Master Yuanjing. In the future, when you learn from teacher, you must remember not to be naughty and mischievous. Lu Shi's chess skills were not bad, but compared to Master Yuanjing, he was still lacking. So he lost without feeling depressed or embarrassed. By the time Wei Ci brought him over, the chessboard had already lost its momentum. Lu Shi decided to divert his attention. Master Yuanjing said to Jiang Pingji, Little friend, we meet again. Hello, sir. She greeted him obediently and said to Lu Shi, Don't worry, father. I know. At this moment, Wei Ci, who was talking to his classmate in a low voice, glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, then quietly shifted his gaze. Master Yuanjing was addicted to chess. How could it be enough to defeat Lu Shi? I'll call you Lanting. He shifted his gaze to Jiang Pingji and asked, Will you play a game with me? As you wish. Jiang Pingji did not know how to play chess, but Lu Shi had learned it before. Although his chess skills were not very good, his basic skills were very solid. She, who had inherited Lu Shi's memories, naturally knew how to play chess. The opening was a little miserable. Feng Ren and Lu Shi, the two observers, couldn't stand it anymore. They wanted to roll up their sleeves and play the game themselves. Lu Shi was even more suspicious. His daughter's chess skills were not that bad. How did Wei Yuan teach him? Unexpectedly, Master Yuanjing acted like a beginner. He placed his chess pieces randomly, and no one could figure out what he was planning. As a player, Jiang Pingji understood that the other party was intentionally guiding her. Jiang Pingji couldn't help but be more serious about the game. She went through Lu Shi's memories in detail in her mind. After familiarizing herself with the game, she used her own method to calculate. The speed at which she placed the chess pieces became slower and slower. In the end, she had to think for half a cup of tea before she placed a chess piece. At that moment, Master Yuanjing suddenly smiled. The game of chess had finally begun. Master Yuanjing looked at the chessboard and smiled. I've won this round. Jiang Pingji pursed her lips so tightly that they almost formed a straight line. There was still some heat in her eyes. One more round. No more, no more. Master Yuanjing shook his head and looked a little tired. I'm already old. How can I compete with young people in terms of energy? Lanting, if you still want to play chess, Zixiao is the best among all of us. You can play 2 rounds with him. Jiang Pingji frowned and looked at Wei Ci. Wei Ci narrowed his eyes and said indifferently, I'm not feeling well. It's not convenient for me to play with you. Jiang Pingji was speechless. She didn't do anything to him, did she? Why is he so angry? Not only was Jiang Pingji surprised, but Wei Ci's classmates who were close to him were also confused. What's wrong with Zixiao today? Why do I feel like he's a different person? You think so too? Did that Lu Xiao Langjun unintentionally make fun of his appearance? Although in this day and age, the beauty standard of men was based on gentleness, the more feminine the better. Their bodies were delicate and soft, and they would be blown away by the wind. There were some people who hated that kind of atmosphere. Wei Xi was one of them. He hated being treated as a woman, and he hated it even more when others made a fuss about his appearance. If Lu Xi violated this taboo, and was treated coldly by Wei Xi, it seemed to make sense. Jiang Pingji's hearing was amazing. Naturally, she didn't miss the discussion. She was also confused. At most, he just said that he was good-looking. Did he have to be so angry? However, she wasn't a credit, nor was she gold or silver. She couldn't expect everyone to like her. If Wei Xi didn't like her, so be it. It wasn't like she would lose a piece of flesh. Jiang Pingji soon forgot about this detail. She sat quietly at the side and watched the others play. Lu Xi, Feng Run, and the other elders were also sensible. They knew that their presence would make the others feel uncomfortable, so they simply found an excuse to leave. However, before Lu Xi left, he winked at his daughter. "Don't give yourself away, my daughter. Do you know how to play the drinking game?" Jiang Pingji was young. The others were either in their 20s or about the same age. She, a teenager, sat quietly in the corner and watched the others play and talk. No matter how one looked at it, the scene was a little sad and pitiful. Therefore, someone took the initiative to talk to her. She was silent for a while, then said, "I know how to drink." "Haha, you're still young. You only took a few sips of wine. How can you say that you know how to drink?" The other party smiled and patted her shoulder as if they were close friends. "We'll be classmates from now on. When you arrive at the academy, if anyone makes things difficult for you, just tell them my name." She listened and nodded shyly. Her big, watery eyes were wide open. If a screenshot was taken, it could probably be named Jiang Pingji's Cleverness JPG. The drinking game was originally an activity to liven things up during banquets. Jiang Pingji also knew some of the rules. All the youths present were top students. Even if a few of them weren't that great, they were the type that could make up for their inadequacies with hard work. When they played the drinking game, the content was naturally as difficult as possible. Poems, songs, and essays were all over the place. There were also obscure geographical knowledge, unofficial history, and biographies. In short, although they couldn't understand it, they always felt that it was awesome. After an hour, Jiang Pingji's brain was stuffed with words. She rested her chin on her hand and looked indifferent. She felt someone was approaching her. She turned her head and saw Wei Xi, who had a bad temper, push a tray toward her. There were all kinds of dried fruits and snacks on the tray. He looked down and avoided Jiang Pingji's sight. Jiang Pingji was surprised and asked, "Did I offend you in any way?" Wei Xi didn't answer her question. "I heard Wenbin mention you a few days ago." Jiang Pingji was stunned. She suddenly remembered the words she used to fool Han Yu. She used to fool Han Yu by saying that she had seen Cheng Jing and Wei Xi in her dream. She even described Wei Xi as beautiful. Was it because of that? She coughed awkwardly and said with a lack of confidence, "It was just a misunderstanding. I used it to fool him." Sure enough, a lie needed several lies to cover up the loophole. Wei Xi said calmly, "It's okay. Since you didn't mean it, I won't hold it against you." Jiang Pingji secretly squinted her eyes. A glimmer of light flashed in her eyes. It would have been better if Wei Xi didn't explain. The more he explained, the more she felt that he was trying to hide something. Chapter 274. Wei Xi looked at Jiang Pingji's side profile, and his heart was filled with complicated feelings. She was like a savage, bloodthirsty, and ferocious beast that lived on human flesh, staring at his fragile neck. Her snow-white teeth had some minced meat on them, and saliva was dripping from them. He could smell the stench coming from the tip of his nose. The shadow of death shrouded him. He thought he was going to die, but in the next second, she turned into a palm-sized white cat and meowed at him in a cute and crisp manner. It was probably an illusion. "But why do I always feel that you are deliberately guarding against me? Do I eat people like a Rakshasa?" Jiang Pingji held her cheeks in puzzlement. Her lips curled into a faint smile, and she asked him innocently, "Of course it was only an illusion." Wei Xi gathered his thoughts. His nerves were tense, as if he was facing a formidable enemy, but he calmly narrated on the surface. Little Langjun, you misunderstood me. When did I deliberately guard against you? Ci and Langjun are not familiar with each other, so I should keep my distance. Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes, and suddenly moved closer to him. Wei Ci's reaction was also very interesting. He was like a frightened rabbit. She sneered in her heart when she saw him suddenly lean back. Instead of retreating, she moved closer to Wei Ci and whispered in his ear. They were so close, but she could clearly feel the trembling of his body. That kind of fear and panic, which could not be controlled by reason, made her more curious. Wei Zixiao. Jiang Pingji deliberately pretended to be innocent and restored her previous cold and serious tone. She said, I don't know why you are so guarded against me, and even afraid of me like a snake, but I hope you understand that the more you act so clearly, the more it arouses my curiosity and desire to investigate. So are you avoiding me, or are you playing hard to get? It was unknown which sentence provoked Wei Ci, but his reaction was about to explode. Dong! The movement in the corner attracted the attention of others. They saw a young person single-handedly holding Wei Ci's hands. His expression was cold and his eyes were fierce. On the other hand, the restrained Wei Ci was lying on the ground in a slightly embarrassed state. Perhaps because of the struggle or something else, his cheeks were dyed red. With a plop, a student sitting by the hot spring saw the scene, and was so shocked that he dropped the fruit plate in his hand. What happened? Sorry, I'm just messing around. You guys continue. Jiang Pingji smiled as if there was no one around. She changed her posture from a half-kneeling position to a kneeling position. She raised her hand, and released the hand that was restraining Wei Ci's wrist. Those with better eyesight could clearly see the faint finger marks left on Wei Ci's wrist. They were playing a little too hard. Wei Ci's chest heaved up and down rapidly. His facial expression was a few degrees below zero. He looked at Jiang Pingji with bloodshot eyes. You tried to push me away just now. I instinctively thought you were going to attack me, so. Spreading out her hands, Jiang Pingji had a look that said, This is not my fault. Wei Ci pursed his lips tightly, and did not say a word for a while. Wei Ci propped himself up from the ground, and ignored the words of concern from the people around him. He strode out of the hot spring room. As long as one was not blind, anyone could see the huge words on Wei Ci's back. I'm angry. The culprit who provoked Wei Ci. Jiang Pingji was dumbfounded. She did not want to take the blame. She did not want to offend Wei Ci. After all, he was one of Master Yuanjing's 4 disciples. He had his own connections in Langyi Academy. He was a bully that could not be offended. She wanted to go to school, not to fight. Why would she provoke Wei Ci for no reason? However, the current situation was that she did not want to offend Wei Ci. Wei Ci came up to her and made her offend him. In the end, he even put the blame on her. What af** King and Justice? Oh, you're the little princess. You have the final say. The audience in the streaming room was rather disappointed. They thought the streamer was going to live stream driving. They did not expect that she would not even drive a toy car. Naidita. #perverted. Just now, the streamer confined him to the ground with one hand. I thought she was going to drive. Streamer Zhengzheng Shanghua. I used to think that the domineering CEO was very cliché, but now I understand why such a cliché is popular. It's entirely because at the moment when you're pinned against the wall, you feel the thrill of being conquered. Streamer Xijing Shanghua. Streamer, shouldn't that be called Didong? If she stood against the wall, she would probably only hit her chest. Looking at the discussion of the audience in the streaming room, Jiang Pingji could not help but have an illusion. She bullied the little princess. But the problem was that she was really not that crazy. Not only did the audience in the streaming room think so, but even the audience who were watching the live broadcast thought so. Although Zixiao is born beautiful, he is a real man. The person who had tried to get close to Jiang Pingji came over. It was unknown whether he was gloating or something else. Although we have many sworn brothers now, you are still a little young at your age. After he finished speaking, he raised his eyebrows at her, and gave her a look that all men understood. Jiang Pingji's face darkened after she heard that. Wei Ci left the hot spring room. The cold wind outside blew, and cleared his feverish mind. Just as Jiang Pingji said, if he behaved as usual and did not reveal any abnormalities, the other party would probably not even look at him. That was exactly what he wanted, but he was not mentally prepared. He showed an abnormality and attracted the other party's attention. The current situation was the complete opposite of his original plan. He stood in the corridor in a daze. The bright white moon in the sky was reflected on the pond. The scenery was pleasant, and it made his state of mind slightly calm. Now that he had calmed down, he did not intend to go back. He was afraid that he would give himself away again. Only God knew that what Jiang Pingji said just now scared him to the point that all the hair on his body stood on end. He was almost scared out of his wits. Forget it, forget it. I will treat her as usual. Wei Xi calmed down for a while and gave himself enough psychological hints. Only when he felt that he could face Jiang Pingji, normally did he turn around and return to the hot spring room. Just as he opened the door, he saw that there was no one inside. There were some liquor tags scattered on the low table. He looked at the empty hot spring room and was stunned. Where is she? She went to cause trouble. Jiang Pingji felt that there were a lot of things to do today. She did not soak in the hot spring much, but she encountered a lot of annoying things. Especially after she was wronged by the little princess, Wei Xi. Something came to her door immediately after. This time, it was her friend Feng Jin, who called for help from outside. When she arrived, the matter was already a little out of hand. Feng Jin, who was originally elegant and graceful, looked angry. His face was covered with bruises. The bruises on his white jade-like face were very eye-catching. Feng Jin was the second legitimate son of the head of the secretariat, Feng Run, who had the guts to hit him, and even hit his face. Jiang Pingji saw that not only was Feng Jin's face injured, but his arm was also cut by a knife. Half of his arm was almost dyed red. She was furious. Chapter 275. Feng Jin was grimacing in pain, but when he heard Jiang Pingji's arrogant declaration, his hand stopped hurting, but his stomach hurt. If they were in Hejin County, it would be fine for her to be so arrogant. At least Lu Shi could handle it. But now they were in Shangjing where the emperor was. She did not have the advantage of being a local snake, but she could still be so arrogant. Thinking of his humility just now, in exchange for such humiliation and a knife to his arm, he suddenly felt that it was better to be arrogant. Lanting, be careful. These people are not friendly. Feng Jin covered his wound with his left hand. Blood kept flowing out from between his fingers. His face was pale because of the pain and blood loss. Even his voice was very weak. Messengers from the royal family of the northern borderline. Jiang Pingji looked at the few strong men who were confronting the people in the courtyard. Each of them had small braids of black hair and a floral scarf on their heads. Their thick eyebrows slanted to the temples, and their faces were deep and well-defined. She could tell at a glance that they were foreigners. They were naked from the waist up. There were strange and complicated tattoos on their shoulders and chests. One could vaguely see that they were ferocious beasts. Their muscles bulged like stones, and one of their arms was thicker than Feng Jin's thigh. Their skin was oiled and could even reflect light. Oh, messengers from the royal family of the northern borderline? Jiang Pingji sneered coldly and took 2 steps forward. The crowd automatically made way for her. Feng Jin, you've lived like a dog, haven't you? You're the son of the head of the secretariat, and you're being bullied like this? They're just watchdogs. They're not the descendants of the royal family of the northern borderline, and you're beaten up like this. You're a disgrace to your father. Feng Jin's expression changed. He was not angry at Jiang Pingji's harsh words, but it was the truth. The son of the head of the secretariat was beaten up in the hot spring house under Prince Changshuo's name, and his important right arm was also injured. Because of this injury, it was very likely that he would not be able to participate in the assessment in a few days. Who are you calling watchdogs? Jiang Pingji stood in front of Feng Jin and looked at the person who spoke. Some of the other students were watching, and some wanted to go forward to help, but they did not bring any weapons. Just by comparing their size, how could they be a match for the strong men who were holding knives? Feng Jin was the unluckiest. Not only did he hurt his arm, but he was also slapped in the face. The rest of them had messy clothes and occasional scratches. TSK. He's scolding the dog that stole his sister-in-law. It was as if Jiang Pingji had eaten gunpowder. She was in a bad mood. Now that someone was asking for a beating in front of her, she naturally rebuked him without holding back. Don't people in the North Borderline have different levels? Apart from the royal family, everyone else was second-class trash. Calling you watchdogs is a compliment to show the friendship between our two countries. Feng Jin had never seen such a shrewish Jiang Pingji. He was so shocked that he forgot about the pain. Those rough men were also choked by Jiang Pingji's scolding. The leader looked fierce, but he was not good with words. They felt that those scholars were weak and only knew how to mutter. Their legs added together were not even as thick as one of their arms. It was a sensitive period. Even if they humiliated these people, the Dongqing royal family would not do anything to them. Who did you say had an affair with sister-in-law? A trace of panic flashed across the leader's face. He took a step forward with his knife and instantly closed the distance between him and Jiang Pingji. He threatened her fiercely. Jiang Pingji laughed and grinned, showing her white teeth. You also stole your father's concubine. Feng Jin knew that Jiang Pingji would not speak without a reason. What she said was probably true. Otherwise, the strong man would not have reacted so fiercely. Suddenly, he could not help but think of the night in the bandits' village, when Jiang Pingji exposed his background. Huayu, which dog hurt you? Jiang Pingji did not care about the strong men in front of her at all. If they were not happy, she would fight. She would not lose in an argument, let alone in a fight. Lanting, Dongqing is a land of etiquette. Feng Jin secretly smiled bitterly. Oh yes, the one who hit me was the one with the green headscarf. He felt that Jiang Pingji's words were very cool, but he also had to pay attention to the influence between the two countries. However, his friend was willing to stand up for him, so he could not refuse her kindness. Speak the human language to people, because people can understand the human language. Speak the dog language to dogs, because dogs can understand the human language. Look, if you speak the human language to them, they can't understand. But if I speak to them like that, can't they understand? Jiang Pingji snorted. When dealing with foreign friends, you should change accordingly and actively eliminate the language barrier. That is the correct way of diplomacy. Everyone knew that Jiang Pingji was bullshitting, but some people felt that they had been brainwashed. This kind of fallacious reasoning seemed to be quite interesting. The strong men from the northern borderline were there to pick a fight. Originally, they were quite happy to bully the weak scholars, but when they met Jiang Pingji, who was so eloquent, they suddenly became angry. If they could not win in an argument, then they would fight. Anyway, it would be fine as long as no one died. Dongqing had been emphasizing culture and restraining martial arts for many years. The men at the border of the northern borderline were considered to be unyielding men, but after they entered Dongqing, all the men they saw were sissies with flowers in their hair and powder in their hair. Occasionally, there were a few normal men, but they did not use their limbs. They could pat their chests and say that the white chickens in the courtyard were not enough for them to chop, let alone the short man in front of them. As it turned out, they seemed to have met a fake sissy, but a real Hercules. Bang! Jiang Pingji's body was thin and small, so she had the advantage of dexterity. Her strength and appearance had nothing to do with each other. They thought they could take her down with the raise of their hands, but they did not expect her to be more slippery than a loach. She snatched the blade from one of the men's hands with her bare hands and pinched the man's wrist with 2 fingers. Not only did she force the man to let go of the blade, but at the same time, she turned around and got close to the man's chest. She pulled the man's body forward, and with her other elbow, she struck the man's Adam's apple. In a flash, she caught the handle of the blade that the man had let go of. At the same time, she twisted her body and kneed the man. Those with sensitive ears could even hear the sound of a sack bursting and liquid splattering. Everyone was speechless. Wait, that position! Feng Jin was so scared that he took a step back. His legs were faintly trembling. Jiang Pingji used the strong man's body as a shield to block the knife that was aimed at her back. She turned her wrist, and the blade turned in another direction. It was as if she had eyes on the back of her head. The blade moved agilely in front of the ambusher's eyes. Suddenly blood splattered, and it hurt people's eyes. That was not all. After she dropped the shield, her fingers became claws and strangled the man's throat. She pulled him down and threw him to the ground. Not only did his face hit the ground, but the force of Jiang Pingji's fall, and the force of Jiang Pingji's fall made his face a bloody mess. It was clearly a dozen strong men ganging up on one person, but looking at the situation on the battlefield, it looked like Jiang Pingji ganging up on a group of people. Feng Jin knew that Jiang Pingji could fight, but he did not know that she could fight to this extent. Those strong men were well-trained warriors of the northern borderline. They were few in number, but on the battlefield, they were like a human head harvester. Tell me, which dog's paw hurt Huayu? Chapter 276. Jiang Pingji basically showed no mercy. Although they were still alive, they were basically crippled. According to the customs of the three tribes of the northern borderline, the fate of these handicapped people was to be abandoned and thrown into the wilderness to fight for their lives with wild beasts. In the northern border where resources were scarce and the environment was harsh, this was a fate worse than death. Not answering, "Fine, I'll chop off both arms." After saying that, the broadsword in her hand was already thirsty. At this moment, the sound of armor clashing and a series of heavy footsteps came from outside the courtyard. Wait, Jiang Pingji sneered in her heart. She would lose face if he told her to slow down. In the end, he was a step too late. He raised his hand and the blade fell. A bloody arm was chopped off. Jiang Pingji raised her head and looked out of the courtyard coldly. 2 rows of armored soldiers from the northern borderline ran in, all carrying shiny weapons in their hands. Each of them was murderous, and the aura around them was like that of a dormant ferocious beast. Their imposing manner gave people a very oppressive feeling. A man dressed in northern borderline attire came out of the crowd. Looking at the northern borderline warriors lying on the ground, his face darkened. I used my own abilities to kill people, why should I stop? Jiang Pingji removed her foot from his face and kicked him away. She stared at him coldly. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for speaking too slowly. How can you blame me for acting too quickly? She struck first, not giving the other party a chance to question her. This is Dongqing, not the barbaric and uncivilized northern borderline. If you don't want to abide by the rules, get lost. Since you want to negotiate with the royal family through marriage, please show your sincerity. Jiang Pingji had beaten him up and chopped off his arm in front of him. The situation was already beyond redemption. At the end of the day, they were standing up for him. How could Feng Jin drag them down at this time? He panted and endured the severe pain in his arm. With a pale face he said, seriously injuring the son of an important minister and humiliating the young students of Dongqing. Is this the sincerity of your court in the peace talks? Today's matter cannot end so easily. Your northern borderline must give us an explanation. If these people were fooling around with ordinary people or poor disciples, Dongqing would have to swallow it no matter how unhappy they were. After all, they had to focus on the big picture. But what was the result? Among the crowd, Feng Jin was the most severely injured. He was the second legitimate son of the Feng family, one of the 4 noble families in Dongqing, and the son of Feng Run, the head of the secretariat. If the bruises on his face were not applied with good ointment, it would probably take at least 10 days to half a month to disappear. Apart from that, his right arm was also cut by a knife. Blood kept flowing out. The injury to his right arm meant that he could not write, which would affect the upcoming assessment. In order to be in the limelight during the assessment, which student didn't put in great effort? If Feng Jin missed this assessment, all his previous efforts would be in vain. Even the plans he had made early in the morning would be disrupted. Who would compensate for such a huge loss? Feng Jin had suffered so much. Was he willing to be beaten up for nothing? Would Feng Ren let it go? Would the Feng clan let this go? For a prestigious landowning household that had existed for more than 1,000 years, they could lose their lives, but they could not afford to lose their face. Seeing that Jiang Pingji and Feng Jin were echoing each other with an arrogant attitude, the face of the man from the northern borderline, who led the troops over, also stiffened. Jiang Pingji added fuel to the fire and took the opportunity to add another sentence. If you have no intention of negotiating, You should make it clear as soon as possible. Today, you deliberately humiliated the son of an important official in the court. This matter must be reported to the officials. Instead of glaring at me here, why don't you go back and ask your master how to settle this matter? The other party was irritated by Jiang Pingji, and a lot of anger had accumulated in his stomach. A few warriors from the northern borderline were looking for trouble. Originally, they were secretly instructed by someone. Even if they hurt someone, they were not afraid. When the time came, someone would naturally come out to support them. Dongqing was used to being weak. Even if it was for the sake of the overall situation, they had to swallow the loss this time. However, they never expected that the warriors from the northern borderline, who came to look for trouble, would not only bully others, but be pressed to the ground and trampled on. The man from the northern borderline was the general of the northern borderline, who escorted the princess. He had some status and prestige among the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. He should have led his troops over arrogantly with the intention of denouncing them, but now he was put in a difficult position by a teenager. Who do you think you are? You hurt the warriors of the northern borderline. You should pay the price. Arrest them all. The man from the northern borderline calmed himself down and planned to arrest them first, so that there would be no evidence. As long as they insisted that they were the ones who suffered losses, according to the Dongqing royal family's usual weak style, the northern borderline would not suffer losses. So what if he was the son of an important minister in the court? As long as he did not kick an iron plate, the royal family of Dongqing would not dare to offend him when the marriage was already set in stone. Therefore, the man from the northern borderline looked at Jiang Pingji and Feng Jin with a hint of murderous intent. It turned out that they did not kick an iron plate, but an iron wall. Wu Liba, who did you say you wanted to arrest? At that moment, Lu Shi's voice came from the crowd. The man from the northern borderline did not expect someone to be able to recognize his identity. He could not help but look in the direction of the voice. My son is right. This is Dongqing, not your northern borderline. If you don't want to come here without returning, then you better tuck your tail between your legs and behave. Otherwise, no matter how the other old farts try to protect you, I, Lu Zhongqing, will not let you walk out of the city gates of Shangjing. Feng Run, who was a step behind, looked at his disheveled son with a gloomy face. He then looked at the arrogant people from the northern borderline and sneered coldly in his heart. He did not open his mouth to argue with the envoys from the northern borderline. Instead, he chose to ignore them and ordered someone to bring a medical officer over. Bandage your wounds. Later, you will enter the palace with me to meet the emperor. Feng Jin's face was pale and he nodded. Wu Liba was in a difficult position. His face turned the color of a pig's liver. He had originally come to embarrass others, but now he was humiliated instead. He was even thrown to the ground and stepped on twice by the other party. Next time, bring some brains with you when you go out. If you want to take others down a notch, you should first see if the other party is a cat or a tiger. Jiang Pingji stepped forward and clicked her tongue. She ignored his embarrassed expression. It's good that Huayu's arm is fine. If anything happens to it and causes it to be difficult to hold a pen in the future, Wu Liba, I don't want your lowly life as compensation. Be smart and break your arms as an apology. Wu Liba's face completely turned into ashes. He looked at Jiang Pingji with a murderous look. If it was anyone else, they would have been scared out of their wits, but she was Jiang Pingji. To put it bluntly, the number of people she had killed was more than the amount of rice he had eaten. This depends on whether the emperor of Dongqing agrees to it or not. After he finished speaking, Wu Liba left with his men. He did not care about the warriors from the northern borderline, who were half dead on the ground. Looking at their backs as they left, Jiang Pingji suddenly slashed at the rockery at the side. Lu Shi sighed. Don't judge Wu Liba by his appearance as a brainless boar. In reality, he is a rare wise general in the northern borderline. Chapter 277. Jiang Pingji had long foreseen the outcome of Nanqing's defeat, but she did not expect that the news of them asking for reinforcements had only just reached Dongqing. Coincidentally, they bumped into the marriage team of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. Dongqing would be in trouble. Although Dongqing and Nanqing had conflicts, they were still considered part of Great Xia, while the 3 tribes of the north borderline and the 4 tribes of Nanman were considered outsiders. In layman's terms, Dongqing and Nanqing were 2 sons of the same father. Even if they were separated, their bones were still connected. However, the 3 tribes of the north borderline and the 4 tribes of Nanman were foreign enemies who coveted their family property. In order to protect the family property of their ancestors, the 2 countries had to temporarily put aside their grudges and join forces. If Nanqing was really defeated by the iron cavalry of the 4 factions of Nanman, Dongqing would face the danger of being attacked from both sides by the 3 tribes of the northern borderline and the 4 factions of Nanman. The annihilation of the country was just around the corner. Therefore, Dongqing had no choice but to lend Nanqing troops to Dongqing. Both parties were interdependent. However, if they borrowed troops, it would definitely affect the military strength of Dongqing's border defense. The military strength used to resist the northern borderline would also be affected. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline had been at war with Dongqing for many years. They had always won more than they lost. Dongqing was courting death by promoting, emphasizing culture and restraining military force. It was foreseeable that after Nanqing came to borrow troops, Dongqing's military strength in the northern borderline would be thinned. It was no wonder that the envoy from the northern borderline was so fearless. Lu Shi sighed and said, "The 3 tribes of the northern borderline have been coveting Dongqing for a long time. I only hope that you are clear-headed and don't let the wolf into the house. Marriage is not a permanent solution, but it seems that it is too late." Feng Ren looked at his son with pity. His heart ached when he saw his son's pale face. He sneered coldly when he heard Lu Shi sigh. He despised the man sitting on the throne. Although Feng Ren knew that he would not get any justice in the palace this time, he still wanted to let the emperor know that the Feng family was not a pushover. Feng Ren cupped his hands and apologized to Lu Shi. Then he left with his son, whose wound had just been treated. His face was as cold as ice. After experiencing such a thing, many people no longer had the leisure to soak in the spring. Suddenly, someone patted Jiang Pingji's shoulder. "I didn't expect you to be so skilled in martial arts." It made one want to shout out in satisfaction. "I don't like those bastards either. It's just that I can't beat them up like you." It is said that the warriors of the northern borderline are fearless of death. But from what I see now, it seems that they are not as powerful as you. She resisted the urge to subdue him and turned her head calmly. It turned out to be the young man who had tried to get close to her before. Jiang Pingji warned him expressionlessly, "For the sake of the words grandson of AB*TCH. I don't like people patting my shoulder from behind. If you're a stranger, I'm afraid you won't be able to keep your arm." The other party was stunned, and he withdrew his hand as if he had been electrocuted. "I didn't expect you to be so vicious at such a young age." As they were talking, the group returned to the Rose Courtyard Sky Room 1. Separated by a corridor, Jiang Pingji noticed a tall and slender figure in white standing in the corridor. The man's ink-black hair draped over his shoulders, faintly revealing his pale, tightly pursed lips and a slight chin. Perhaps he heard the footsteps, but he turned around slightly. His indifferent gaze swept around and fixed on Jiang Pingji. Jiang Pingji had fought with someone, so her clothes were inevitably stained with blood. If she didn't look relaxed, people who didn't know would think that the blood was hers. However, Wei Xi was very clear that this woman was not the one who was at a disadvantage. The blood could only belong to someone else. Thinking of this, Wei Xi moved his gaze away calmly and asked the young man who was familiar with Jiang Pingji, "Xiaoyin, what's going on?" A group of boorish men who claimed to be envoys from the northern borderline were causing trouble in front. A servant from the Feng residence came to Lanting for help. Out of curiosity, I followed them to take a look. I didn't expect those people from the northern borderline to be so arrogant. They bully Dongqing. How hateful. The young man's voice was filled with resentment, but he immediately resumed his playfulness. "Zixiao, let me tell you, Master really took in a good student. She's really good at fighting." A servant from the Feng residence. Wei Xi frowned and glanced at Jiang Pingji, who looked normal. Wei Xi had always known that she was good at fighting. Not to mention a few warriors from the northern borderline. If she had a spear, she could easily kill her way in and out of the enemy's formation more than 10 times. She could take the head of the enemy's general as easily as taking something out of her pocket. But he sighed slightly in his heart. It was indeed different. He rarely saw this person show an expression other than indifference. If it was in the past she thinking of this, Wei Xi firmly suppressed the thoughts in his heart and calmed his mind. Facing this woman, he needed to be 120% vigilant. Otherwise, if he was not careful, he would have nowhere to hide in front of her. He had experienced this a long time ago. Jiang Pingji explained, Feng Jin is my good friend. He was bullied, so I naturally had to go over and support him. What's more, those boorish men from the northern borderline are really annoying. I gave them a light punishment, or else I would have nowhere to vent my anger. What a joke! Beating her partner was the same as beating her. Of course, she had to get back at them. You didn't just give them a light punishment just now. You made them lose their courage. To deal with the ambitious foreign tribes from the northern borderline, you should use such a forceful method. If you talk about propriety, righteousness, integrity, and trust with them, they will only think that you are afraid of them. Xiaoyin placed both hands on Jiang Pingji's shoulders. With an expression of experience, he said warmly, In the future, when we go to Langyi Academy, I will protect you. Wei Xi silently glanced at Lu Zheng's hands. His eyes gradually darkened. I said, don't pat my shoulder from behind. Jiang Pingji repeated, My name is Lu Zheng. Master gave me the courtesy name Xiaoyin. Look, we know each other now. We are not considered strangers, right? Jiang Pingji rolled her eyes and said, Up to you. If I dislocate your arm next time, don't ask me to take responsibility. After saying that, Jiang Pingji skillfully shook her shoulders and slid out like a mudfish. Lu Zheng found that the shoulder under his palm had become extremely soft and smooth. Before he could subconsciously grab it, she had already left his palm. He could only stare at his hands in a daze. Then he looked at Jiang Pingji's back and sighed. You really have good skills. Wei Xi looked at him coldly. His eyelids slightly narrowed as he said, When martial arts practitioners reach a certain level, they will be highly vigilant of their surroundings. If an unfamiliar aura tries to approach them, it is extremely easy for them to unconsciously capture it. Xiaoyin, be more careful. Lu Zheng was startled. He suddenly realized that Wei Xi was saying that he was stupid. Zixiao, why do you also read such indecent novels from the streets? No matter how he looked at it, his words sounded like the standard of a wandering master in a novel from the streets. If you don't believe me, try approaching her when she's taking a nap. But if her arm is crippled, I won't take responsibility. Wei Xi knew that it was not a rumor from the streets. It was true. Hey, Wei Zixiao, you never have good intentions. I won't be fooled. Chapter 278. After returning to the hot spring room, Wei Xi asked the other students in detail to understand the whole story. He sighed and said, Feng Huayu's fortune never comes in pairs, and misfortune never comes alone. He suffered for someone else for nothing. But it's fortunate that this is the case. Otherwise, tonight's incident would be difficult to resolve. Dongqing is already in a precarious situation. It can't withstand such a shock. Jiang Pingji listened at the side. She raised her eyebrows slightly and asked, What do you mean? Wei Xi didn't want to answer. After all, he had some indescribable resistance to this person. He subconsciously didn't want to have too much contact with her. But after a slight hesitation, Wei Xi recalled what Jiang Pingji whispered in his ear when she imprisoned his hands. He didn't want her to pay special attention to him. He could only let go of the grudge in his heart and truly treat her as a very ordinary person. Thus, Wei Xi answered calmly, If I'm not wrong, these warriors from the northern borderline are planning to cause trouble for the residents of the Count of Jinbei. Lu Zheng, who was at the side, suddenly reacted. Yes, among the group of people just now, there was indeed a Lang Jun from the residents of the Count of Jinbei. The descendants of the Count of Jinbei have contributed a lot to Dongqing. They shed blood and shed blood. They were originally flourishing, but in order to guard the northern borderline, some of them died in battle, some died of illness. There aren't many seedlings left. Among the Langjuns today, the reclusive crown prince of Jinbei was also present. The descendants of the Count of Jinbei guarded the northern borderline and took the lives of many northern borderline warriors. Most of the descendants of the Count of Jinbei died on the battlefield at the hands of the generals of the northern borderline. The two sides have long formed a deep hatred. It's not surprising that they have a conflict when they meet. The descendants of the Count of Jinbei are few and far between, but they still hold a large number of troops. The emperor has been afraid of them for a long time, and sees them as a thorn in his side. If anything happens to the crown prince, I'm afraid the three tribes of the northern borderline would probably wake up laughing even in their dreams. The emperor sitting high on the dragon throne might be angry on the surface, but he must be very happy in secret. I heard you say that there's a person called Wu Liba among the group of people causing trouble. He's one of the few wise generals in the three tribes of the northern borderline. He looks stupid and reckless, but he's actually very meticulous. Now that they were in the territory of Dongqing, no matter how arrogant they were, they would not dare to act so recklessly. However, if the target is the crown prince of the residence of Jinbei Marquis, the emperor will be furious on the surface, but will secretly protect Wu Liba and his group. By doing so, he could not only satisfy the emperor's wishes, but he could also sow discord between the residents of Northern Marquis and the emperor, causing the two to completely turn against each other. The military power in the hands of the Count of Jinbei was too great. How could the emperor not know the ambition of the three tribes of the northern borderline? However, he was even more afraid that the residents of Count Jinbei would be overshadowed by their achievements. Lu Zheng felt a chill down his spine. Even though he had talked about the world's situation with his classmates, he had never been as cold as he was now. The other point is also the reason why the three clans of the northern borderline are the most fearless. Nanqing's army was defeated like a landslide. Dongqing was bound to send reinforcements. At that time, the border of the northern borderline would be in danger. Now, I'm afraid the emperor is looking forward to the marriage even more. He hopes to temporarily stabilize the three tribes of the northern borderline by marriage, but he doesn't know that the northern borderline has been coveting Dongqing for many years. Why would they care about a weak marriage relationship? Jiang Pingji snorted coldly. What you mean by this is that the emperor may now favor the three tribes of the northern borderline and work hard to stabilize them with all kinds of generous conditions. It's not that it's possible, it's that they will definitely do so. Wei Xi sighed softly. He also had feelings for the royal family of Dongqing, but he couldn't stand the fact that they were too good at courting death. The more disappointed he was with the royal family of Dongqing, the more he missed the person who made him suffer for half of his life. Putting aside how shocking it was for a woman to ascend to the throne, at the very least, she was able to stabilize the country, prevent the people from being humiliated, prevent chaos in the court, and prevent the people from being anxious and fearful. Thinking of this, the pain he had suffered seemed to be nothing. The power of the emperor is not bestowed by the deities of heaven and earth. It comes from the people and the people of the world. Therefore, the emperor is light, but the people are heavy. As an emperor, if he destroys his reputation through marriage, struggles to survive by ceding land, exploits the people through tribute, and humiliates the country through reparations, how can he have the face to sit on the throne? The emperor should guard the gates of the country, and the emperor should die for the country. Now that he could do it all over again, he hoped that he could truly assist her for once, as a strategist, and not as someone that even he despised. Jiang Pingji felt a little depressed. She snorted. Oh, the group of people from the northern borderline have achieved their goal of testing the bottom line by creating trouble. Wu Liba's action seemed arrogant, but upon careful thought, there were many conspiracies and calculations involved. The emperor's final judgment was biased towards the northern borderline. Wu Liba's goal of testing the waters had been achieved, and he would be more fearless in the future. But Lu Langjun, you don't have to worry. As long as your father is still around, the emperor won't touch you easily. When he said this, Wei Xi's expression was a little strange and conflicted, but he quickly restrained it. How could he not be conflicted? Lu Xi had clearly been personally. TSK, how could he become the county chief of Hu County? If Lu Xi had the ability, he wouldn't have ended up like that. Wei Xi didn't know what went wrong, but he didn't intend to investigate further because there was no need. He was very clear that people would change. From the moment things changed, everything that he knew would be useless. The right path was to be down to earth. Jiang Pingji was not happy about what Wei Xi said. Only the weak needed to be protected by the strong. She was safe because of Lu Shi, which meant that she was not strong enough. Thinking of this, a strange light flashed in her eyes. An impulse arose in her heart, but she forcefully suppressed it in the end. Jiang Pingji smiled coldly and said meaningfully, "Oh, it's best if he doesn't touch me." If he dared to touch her, he would make the emperor regret crawling out of his mother's womb. Wei Xi was silent. Seeing Jiang Pingji reveal an expression that he was familiar with, he was shocked to find that his hands were secretly sweating. Wei Xi forced himself to calm down. Just as he was about to stand up and leave, Jiang Pingji suddenly asked him, "Is Zixiao very clear about the situation in the court?" He was about to say that he knew a little, but the ignorant Lu Zheng directly exposed him. "Lanting, you don't know about this. Come, let me tell you. Zixiao's policy and political commentaries have always been very exciting. He has a profound analysis of the world's situation and always has his own views. Sitting at home, he has long been aware of the situation in the outside world. Even my master said that he is not inferior to Premier Jiang of the previous dynasty. It's a pity that he is stubborn. I don't know what's bothering him, but he still refuses to accept my master as his disciple." Lu Zheng had placed Wei Xi on a pedestal and praised him with all his might, but in the end he said, "Fortunately, half a year ago, he went down the mountain and hit his head. He finally knocked the water out of his head and agreed to be my master's disciple." Jiang Pingji. Wei Xi. I'll say it again, Lu Xiaoyin. You. Say. Who? Brain. Head. Enter. Water. Yes. Suddenly Lu Zheng rubbed his arms. He was clearly in the hot spring, but his back felt a little chilly. "Xiaoyin, I suddenly feel a little itchy. Come, let's have a game." Without any explanation, Wei Xi pulled the very unwilling Lu Zheng away. Jiang Pingji looked at the bright moon hanging in the sky and suddenly curled her lips. She lowered her head to look at the card between her fingers. Chapter 279. Feng Ren and his son sat in the speeding carriage. The sound of the wheels was mixed with the bustling noise in the carriage, but it couldn't break the strange silence between the two of them. After a long time, Feng Ren sighed and said calmly, "Does your hand still hurt?" Feng Jin sat upright. His face was abnormally pale, and his lips were slightly blue. The wound on his right arm had been bandaged by the medical officer, but the blood had soaked through most of his sleeves and arms. It hadn't dried up yet, and the strong smell filled the entire carriage. He looked rather pathetic. "It doesn't hurt that much anymore." Feng Jin lowered his eyes and answered. He asked hesitantly, "Father, the emperor." Feng Ren interrupted him and said, "I'm afraid the emperor is determined to unite with the 3 tribes of the northern borderline by marriage to stabilize the war situation at the border. Even a child wouldn't bother to use such a naive scheme, but the emperor can't help him after all." Feng Jin didn't miss a word that his father said. The more he listened, the more nervous he became, as if a small drum was beating intensely in his heart. Did his father mean that he was ready to give up the hopeless Dongqing royal family? "You were a little reckless today. If it weren't for Lu Zhongqing's strong martial arts, you wouldn't have just injured your arm." Feng Ren's voice was a little more pitiful and resentful. After all, it was his son who was injured, and the pain was in his father's heart. Feng Jin lowered his eyes and silently listened to Feng Ren's rebuke. He didn't like to stand out, but today he had a conflict with the warriors of the northern borderline, and was even injured by them. Naturally, he had his reasons. If he went forward, he would at most be injured. But if the warriors of the northern borderline pointed their spears at the crown prince of the Count of Jinbei, someone might die. Everyone knew that there were hungry wolves in Dongqing. The Count of Jinbei was the last stronghold of Dongqing in the north. If something happened to the crown prince of the Count of Jinbei, who knew what those people would do? How arrogant would the 3 tribes of the northern borderline be? Maybe it was because of the family tradition, Feng Jin and Feng Ren usually didn't care who was the emperor. However, Feng Jin was still young and hot-blooded. He could not watch what happened today become the fuse for the downfall of the Count of Jinbei. When the time came, the three tribes of the northern borderline would no longer be able to stop them. They would be able to send their troops south and march straight into the hinterland of Dongqing, causing the people to be plunged into misery and suffering. Therefore, Feng Jin stopped the crown prince of Count Jinbei and went forward to face the provocation of those warriors from the northern borderline. He was defeated and was injured. If he hadn't been quick-witted and asked Jiang Pingji for help, it would have been more than just an arm injury. Thinking of Jiang Pingji, Feng Jin's expression softened a little, and he felt a little more warm. At this moment, he somewhat understood what it felt like for a ranger in a common story to be willing to risk his life for the sake of his brother. Feng Ren changed his tone and said somewhat angrily, "However, have you ever thought about what would happen if that brat's martial arts skills aren't good enough, and he gets implicated because of you?" Feng Jin was speechless. He was about to say that Jiang Pingji's martial arts skills were excellent, but Feng Ren did not give him a chance to speak. "Forget it, I owe Lu Zhongqing a favor this time. I'll find a chance to repay him in the future." For a moment, the carriage returned to silence. Feng Ren closed his eyes and could not help but start to think about what to do next. The current royal family of Dongqing was like mud that couldn't be helped. In order to take back the power in the hands of the aristocratic families, that man made even more foolish moves. He secretly supported the influence of his relatives and condoned the power of the eunuchs. He tried to muddy the waters so that he could fish in troubled waters and reap the benefits. What was the result? The struggle between the aristocratic families, the collective group of eunuchs, and the increasingly powerful influence of the relatives became more and more intense. The current emperor had great ambitions, but he did not have the means to control his subordinates. It was originally just a problem of the aristocratic family's power, but now it had become a hidden danger that affected the entire court and the whole of Dongqing. The Feng family had been passed down for more than 1,000 years. What kind of storms and waves had they not seen? Dongqing was just like a big ship that was leaking and in danger of sinking at any time. Now, it was time to retreat bravely and temporarily lay dormant to wait for the general trend of the world. But after a while, Feng Ren already had a plan in his mind. Feng Jin, who was beside him, was still worried. The carriage went straight to Shangyang Palace. The towering palace was like a giant beast lying on the ground. Although it was late at night, the palace lights were not extinguished. If one looked down from above, the brightly lit Shangyang Palace was like a brilliant pearl embedded on the ground. The emperor wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Every day, he would play with the palace maids and concubines. He was extremely luxurious. Occasionally, when he wanted to have an affair, he would either visit the officials' homes incognito, humiliate the officials' wives, or kidnap women and lock them in the summer palace. The officials in Shangjing were angry, but dared not say anything. In the early years, Feng Ren still had expectations for the emperor. He dared to speak and be angry, but naturally, he was not liked by the emperor. If he was not the leader of the Feng family, and the emperor did not dare to touch him, he would have lost his official position, and his family would have suffered. Minister of the Secretariat, what's wrong with you today? At this time, His Majesty has already gone to bed. Feng Ren smiled coldly. His eyes seemed to be penetrating with cold knives. His tough attitude was completely different from his usual good guy image. Feng Ren waved his sleeves angrily. Gone to bed early? Assistant Lu, you can talk to a 3-year-old kid, but it's not enough to deal with me. You and I know what kind of person His Majesty is. If I don't see His Majesty today, I won't leave. Decadent sounds had already come out of the palace, and the air was filled with an extremely extravagant smell. Did he tell him that the emperor had already gone to bed? Did he really think that he, Feng Xianda, was a 3-year-old kid? Assistant Lu had lost his virginity since he was a child. His voice was extremely shrill, and his appearance was neither male nor female. However, he could climb to the position of Assistant Lu in the Shiraba of Shangyang Palace and become a close eunuch trusted by the emperor. He was naturally good at observing people. He smiled awkwardly. Minister of the Secretariat entered the palace late at night. Logically speaking, I should report as soon as possible. However, His Majesty has been working hard for the affairs of the northern borderline recently, and he often gets angry. It's also very difficult for me. Why don't Minister of the Secretariat secretly tell me that if the matter you entered the palace to report is really important, I'll report it for you even at the risk of being punished by His Majesty. Normally, Feng Ren would definitely be so angry that he would leave when Assistant Lu put him in such a difficult position. He didn't want to argue with the eunuch. But today, he answered with a cold smile, resign. Assistant Lu's face changed dramatically. He said, "What happened? How did you make Minister of the Secretariat so angry? Resignation is not a trivial matter. Once it's said, it's hard to take it back. Why did you?" Feng Ren said with a cold face. "It seems that His Majesty is really asleep. I won't disturb him. I'll write to His Majesty tomorrow." Assistant Lu didn't dare to stop him. He quickly said that he would go in and report. No matter how stupid he was, he knew that Feng Ren's resignation at this time was tantamount to adding fuel to the fire. Feng Jin secretly looked at the luxurious and exquisite Shangyang Palace, and then looked at the arrogant Assistant Lu. A chill spread in his heart. Feng Ren said coldly with a fake smile, "Then I'll have to trouble Assistant Lu." Chapter 280. Feng Ren came out of the palace with a cold expression. "Huayi, let's go." Feng Jin secretly glanced at his father, and then listened to the sounds of things being smashed and the terrified screams of the palace maids. After hesitating for a while, he decisively followed his father's footsteps. He was extremely disappointed in the emperor, and had completely given up. As Feng Ren expected, the emperor only rewarded Feng Jin with a large amount of money and medicinal herbs. He didn't mention how to deal with the messengers from the northern borderline. He didn't even try to hide the fact that he was defending the people from the northern borderline. Even though Feng Ren threatened him with resignation, the other party was determined and even secretly felt a little happy. Although Feng Ren was the head of the Secretariat, he was still an official. No matter how insignificant he was still an official. If he took the initiative to resign, the emperor could install his confidant and gradually increase his voice in the court. He thought of Secretary Lu's reaction. When he heard that Feng Ren intended to resign, he hurriedly went to report, but the emperor was overjoyed. When he put the two reactions together, Feng Ren almost laughed. An emperor's foresight was not as far-sighted as a eunuch. If the Feng family continued to follow such an emperor, they would be doomed. It was a good strategy to escape as soon as possible. When it came to chess skills, even Tin Luzheng could not beat Wei Ci, who was full of schemes. "I don't want to play chess with you anymore. Every time I play, I feel like I'm punching cotton. I feel very aggrieved." Luzheng saw that he had lost the upper hand on the chessboard, so he quickly admitted defeat. It would be self-torture to continue playing chess. He wanted to find Jiang Pengji for comfort, but when he turned around, he found that she had disappeared. "Zixiao, did you see where Lanting went?" Lu Zheng asked casually. Wei Ci said, "He left a quarter of an hour ago. I guess he went to bed." Lu Zheng nodded and immediately reacted. He gritted his teeth and wanted to strangle the person in front of him. "You were playing chess with me 15 minutes ago, and now you have the time to pay attention to others." Wei Ci was speechless. Jiang Pingji was watching them play, but she knew that Lu Zheng would lose when she saw the chess. She suddenly lost the mood to continue watching. She did not obediently go to bed like Wei Ci had told her to. Instead, she changed into a set of light clothes and went to drink wine with Lu Shi. Yes, drinking with prostitutes and bringing Lu Shi along. "Lu Shi, what can I do? I'm desperate too." Lu Shi didn't even dare to touch his daughter's glass of wine, as he watched her drink like it was water. "What's bothering you?" he asked. Jiang Pingji dismissed her attendants and asked Lu Shi, "Father, did you mean it when you said you wanted to marry my sister to Wuma Jun?" Lu Shi furrowed his brows and replied, "Of course it's true. As your father, I've also said that you don't need to settle the grudges of the previous generation. In that case, I have a presumptuous request." Jiang Pingji's eyes lit up, and there seemed to be a glimmer of light in them. What? Jiang Pingji said. I want to find a girl with outstanding looks to be my sister's dowry. I want her to marry Wu Majun. Nanxing was already in chaos. The four factions of Nanman had directed their troops towards Nanxing's capital city. Out of the 5 countries in the world, one was about to perish. She could not wait any longer. Lu Shi's current body would only be 13 years old in a few months. In a few years, no one knew what the situation would be like in the world. Jiang Pingji planned to start planning now, instead of waiting until then to passively enter the game. Lu Shi was a little dumbfounded. He understood that his daughter was probably going to use a honey trap to make the already chaotic situation even worse. At the same time, she would secretly gain some benefits. A honey trap in pillow talk could be considered a good idea. But Wu Majun was only an unfavored prince on the surface. Jiang Pingji only sneered coldly at this. Does the Dongqing royal family still have such a thing as moral integrity? They can humiliate their officials' wives, kill their brothers and snatch their sisters-in-law, and kill their parents. How can they lack a concubine who snatches their sons? Rather than directly sending the beauty to him, it's better to let him snatch her himself. That way, it won't arouse suspicion. Also, try to make this girl look similar to Wu Majun's mother, Wang Shi. Jiang Pingji tapped her fingers on the tea table and added. Lu Shi's hands trembled when he heard that. The teacup that he was holding suddenly fell on the table, spilling tea all over the table. His face became extremely ugly. After Jiang Pingji saw it, she revealed an expression that said, I knew it. What you said is not difficult. I'll send someone to look for her. Lu Shi tried hard to maintain a calm expression. He was afraid that he would reveal any unnecessary emotions. Jiang Pingji acted as if she did not see Lu Shi's loss of composure. She continued to leisurely drink her wine with a faint smile on her lips. Lu Shi, who was beside her, was anxious and fearful. As time went by, the psychological pressure that his daughter put on him increased. Spending the night in the red light district, enjoying a night of singing and dancing, it was indescribably carefree. When the sun hung high in the sky the next day, Jiang Pingji returned to the hot spring house with the smell of alcohol. Where the hell did you come from? Lu Zheng saw her and was about to greet her, but he was scared away by the various colors of rouge on her body. The rouge smelled good, but it could not withstand the strong smell of alcohol. The combination of the two was a kind of olfactory torture for people who were used to smelling all kinds of incense. Chongqing Alley. That's not a hell of a place. Jiang Pingji soaked her face with a wet towel. She looked much more sober. Lu Zheng was speechless. Even though it was his first time in Shangjing, and his first time soaking in the hot spring, he knew what kind of place Chongqing Alley was. It was a gentle place for men, and a red light district where all kinds of beauties gathered. The teenager in front of him was not even fully grown yet, right? The wine there is delicious and the music is not bad. If you like it, I'll bring you there later. Lu Zheng quickly agreed to Jiang Pingji's invitation. How can I accept that? But I heard that there are many talented women in Chongqing Alley who are full of knowledge. Many young and talented men will always have a poetry competition in order to win a beauty's smile. I really want to see it. Wei Xi was speechless. He glanced at Lu Zheng, who was slightly eager to try, and then looked at Jiang Pingji. He snorted coldly. Seeing Wei Xi walk past them, Lu Zheng said with a bitter face, Zixiao has never liked to be close to women. He looks down on that kind of place. He heard our conversation just now. I hope he won't say anything in front of Master. He won't say anything, Jiang Pingji said with certainty. Lu Zheng asked, How do you know? Jiang Pingji found it funny and answered, Intuition. Wei Xi did not say anything, but Jiang Pingji and Lu Zheng could not go to Chongqing Alley because Master Yuanjing left Jishan with his students in the afternoon. Seeing that, Lu Shi felt that soaking in the hot spring was boring, so he took Jiang Pingji and hitched a ride with them. They went down the mountain together. When they arrived at the city gate, they were still talking and laughing when a piece of shocking news came. Chapter 281. Wait! Why did something happen to the crown prince of the Count of Jinbei? Jiang Pingji sat in the carriage, and watched the bullet screen in boredom to kill time. Occasionally, she chatted with the audience. Her sensitive ears heard the whispers of passers-by outside the carriage. She suddenly perked up and hurriedly lifted the curtain of the carriage, jumping out to inquire. This series of actions almost scared the people in the carriage and the coachman. The latter hurriedly pulled the reins and stopped the carriage. "Lanting, how can you be so reckless? What if you accidentally hurt yourself?" Lu Shi was so frightened by Jiang Pingji's action of jumping out of the carriage. When he came back to his senses, he found that his back was drenched in cold sweat. Jiang Pingji turned her head and said that she was fine. At the same time, she grabbed the commoner who was gossiping just now and repeated the previous question. Why did something happen to the crown prince of the Count of Jinbei? The commoner was so frightened that he almost forgot how to speak. He looked at Jiang Pingji's attire and knew that she was not an ordinary person. He could not help but secretly curse his bad luck. It was not easy to serve a noble person. If he accidentally angered her, it would be difficult to keep his head. With such a perturbed feeling, the commoner smiled at Jiang Pingji uneasily. His smile was very forced. After a long time he squeezed out a sentence. This matter spread around last night. It's said that the crown prince of the Count of Jinbei fought with someone for the title of courtesan. There was a conflict, and a few people were killed. The crown prince was weak and could not withstand the stimulation. He died on the belly of the courtesan. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Yuan Jing and the others and Lu Shi also recovered from Jiang Pingji's reckless jumping out of the carriage. They understood the reason for her loss of composure, and their faces all turned cold. Wei Xi sighed and said, Feng Huayu's good intentions were wasted by the crown prince of the Count of Jinbei. In order to control the situation, Feng Jin knew that the people from the northern borderline wanted to find trouble with the crown prince of the Count of Jinbei. Instead, he confronted them. Not only was he beaten up, but his right arm was also injured. He did not have the chance to participate in the assessment that was about to begin, and missed a great opportunity to rise rapidly. The crown prince of the residence of the northern marquis was unaware of the danger. Instead of obediently going to bed at night, he ran off to compete with others for the title of top beauty. Beside him, Lu Jing glanced at Wei Xi, who was in the same carriage. There was a puzzled look in his eyes. He said strangely, "From what Zixiao said, you're blaming the crown prince of the Count of Jinbei for this matter. Could it be that there's nothing fishy about the northern borderline?" Wei Xi smiled and said, "You may not know this, but this crown prince of the Count of Jinbei was originally the son of a concubine and was not favored. However, the bloodline of the Count of Jinbei was declining. Most of the young men died on the battlefield, and the crown prince who had been established before died at a young age, not even leaving behind an heir. As a result, the position of the crown prince of the residence of Northern Marquis was given to the son of that concubine. It was impossible for a bastard son to be made a crown prince in an ordinary family. However, this bastard was already the only child, and the residence of Count Jinbei had no choice. Not only that, this bastard son was congenitally deficient. He had some defects since he was born in his mother's womb, and he was prone to illness. The Count of Jinbei regarded him as a fragile porcelain doll, and he did not even dare to speak loudly. They spoiled him to the extreme, and gradually raised him to be blindly arrogant and foppish. Perhaps there are traces of the northern borderline in this, but this crown prince is courting death. There's no doubt about that. If he was smarter, he would have known to behave himself when Feng Huayu helped him avoid the disaster. Why would he fight for the title of courtesan belle then?" Wei Xi said with a cold expression. He did not care at all what kind of crisis the death of the crown prince would bring to Dongqing. On the other side, Jiang Pingji asked about the details in detail. The commoner did not know any of this, and he immediately put on a bitter face. "Lang Jun, I'm just here to join in the fun. I heard about this from other people's idle chatter. How would I know what those big shots said and did? Even if you ask me, I can't answer." Jiang Pingji looked at the commoner and sighed in disappointment. She turned around and returned to the carriage. Lu Shi glanced at Jiang Pingji and said in a low voice, "Don't worry. When we arrive at the Feng residence, I'll send someone to inquire about it in detail." Since this matter has caused such a stir that even the commoners are talking about it, it must be quite a big deal. It shouldn't be difficult to find out. Jiang Pingji nodded, but she still looked a little absent-minded. Lu Shi and his son temporarily stayed at the Feng residence, while Master Yuanjing and his students stayed at another residence on the other side of Shangjing. The two groups of people did not go the same way. Once they entered the city, they naturally separated. Lu Shi asked about the place where Master Yuanjing and his people were staying. He politely said that he would bring his son to pay a formal visit to Master Yuanjing after the matter was settled. After all, he was his daughter's teacher in the future, and basic respect was still necessary. Master Yuanjing did not care about these customs. He said to Wei Ci, "Now that the situation is tense, Shangjing is in a state of panic. I don't know what the northern borderline bandits will do. Send County Chief Lu on my behalf, so that I can be at ease." Wei Ci's expression did not change. He nodded and agreed, but he did not agree with it. As long as Lu Shi was with Lu Shi, whoever came to cause trouble would be courting death. Why would he need to escort them? They drove to the Feng residence in a low-key manner, and did not encounter any accidents. Suke had been waiting at the door since he received news that Jiang Pingji was coming back. He saw the familiar carriage from afar, and finally let out a long sigh of relief. He did not know why, but he felt that he could not let his Langjun out of his sight. Otherwise she would cause trouble. However, when he went forward, the first person to get out of the carriage was an unfamiliar face. Wei Ci was speechless. Suke looked puzzled, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. If Wei Ci was not wearing a scholar's robe, and was dressed as a man, he would have thought that he was a girl just by looking at his face. After Wei Ci got out of the carriage, Jiang Pingji followed. Suke could still smell the faint fragrance of wine on her. "Xiaoyu, many things happened last night for you to not go to Jishan. You did not go, and you missed a lot of good things." Suke looked like he had nothing left to live for. He knew that if he let his Langjun run around, he would definitely run into some messy things. Before he could calm down, he heard the sound of jade beads falling on a plate. It made his scalp tingle. Xiaoyu?" Wei Ci's eyes fell on Suke. He murmured softly with some doubts. His voice, which was neither too soft nor too loud, fell into the ears of others. It was like a bunch of feathers gently tickling the sensitive earlobes. It made people have goosebumps, and they could not help but blush. Well, Suke blushed. Jiang Pingji was speechless. She did not expect Suke to have a problem with his voice. "Do you know me?" Chapter 282. I don't know you. I just feel that the name sounds very familiar. It's as if I've known you for a long time, but I can't remember where I've heard it. Wei Ci gave a perfect smile, and then cupped his hands in the other before his chest to Lu Shi and his son. He said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "County Chief Lu and Langjun have safely arrived at the Feng residence. I have not disgraced my master's orders, so I will not disturb you any longer. I am afraid that my master will be waiting anxiously, so I will take my leave first." Lu Shi tried to persuade him to stay, but Wei Ci used the excuse that it was important to report and left. Suke asked in private, "Is that your new friend?" Jiang Pingji secretly rolled her eyes. She did not think that Wei Ci saw her as a friend. It was obvious that this man called Wei Ci, for some unknown reason, was very repulsed by her. It was not considered hostile, but it was not friendly either. However, as long as it did not affect her safety, and Wei Ci was unwilling to spill his secrets, she could not be bothered to investigate the root cause. "We just met once. He was ordered by Master Yuanjing to send me and my father off." "Master Yuanjing?" Suke was surprised. Did his Langjun mean that he met the famous Master Yuanjing when he went to Jishan's hot spring last night? He was the idol of many young people in Dongqing, and Suke was no exception. "Is Langjun Master Yuanjing's disciple?" Suke asked with a competitive look in his eyes. "Yes, Master Yuanjing's disciple. I have some secrets, but..." Jiang Pingji smiled and said confidently, "One can only be a thief for 1,000 days. How can one guard against a thief for 1,000 days? I want to see how long he can keep the secret in his stomach." Suka was confused. He didn't know what his Langjun meant. More importantly, why did Langjun describe him as a thief? On the other side, Wei Xi was having a headache. Meeting Jiang Pingji yesterday was already outside of his plan. He did not expect to meet Suka today. What was even more horrifying was that Suka was actually by His Majesty's side at that moment. Did the sun rise from the west? Thinking of Su Xiaoyu, whom he had met before, and recalling the face he had just seen, Wei Xi felt conflicted. He felt that there was something wrong with the way he woke up. When did Her Majesty and Lu Shi have such a good relationship? When did Her Majesty know Feng Jin at such a young age? Since when was Suka truly willing to serve His Majesty? In fact, it was not the way he woke up that had a problem. It was the Emperor who had a problem. Once he thought of her expression, mannerisms and battle prowess that she was all too familiar with. Wei Xi silently suppressed this absurd thought. Wei Xi did not expect that the matter that gave him a headache was not over yet. As soon as he returned to the residence where the students of Langyi Academy were staying, he acutely noticed that the surrounding atmosphere was slightly stagnant. Looking around, not only did the students look unhappy, even Master Yuan Jing, who was always optimistic, looked cold. This scene made Wei Xi's heart tremble. He had a faint ominous premonition. Master, I have sent County Chief Lu and his son safely to the Feng Mansion. Yes, I understand. Mr. Yuanjing seemed to have aged a little. His lips, which were usually curled, were now pressed into a straight line. His eyes were filled with frost. Master, did you encounter something difficult? Why do you look so distressed? Wei Xi asked. Master Yuanjing restrained his expression, but the melancholy between his eyebrows was still eye-catching. I'm fine. You can go and review your lessons. Don't go out easily these few days. After saying that, he stood up with the support of the table beside him. His footsteps were faintly frivolous, which made Wei Xi very worried. After Master Yuanjing left, the suffocating silence in the room was finally broken. Wei Xi looked at Zuda. Zuda, you have always been taking care of Master. Do you know why Master is like this? Ever since Zuda entered Langyi Academy, he had volunteered to take care of the older Master Yuanjing. Although this person was a little simple-minded and held a different philosophy from Wei Xi, Zuda was extremely respectful to Master Yuan. He followed him all the time and almost never left his side. Zuda saw that his classmates in the room were all looking at him. Suddenly the pressure doubled. He could only bite the bullet and say, "This matter. Master strictly forbade me to say it." Wei Xi's expression turned cold. He flicked his sleeves and stood up. Since Zuda did not want to say it, he would find out from other sources. Most of the other students had the same reaction. Looking at the empty hall, Zuda could not help but grit his teeth in anger and vent his anger by pounding the ground. Damn the northern borderline. 2 flowers bloomed, one on each side. Jiang Pingji looked at Feng Jin, whose arm was tied up. His movement of raising his right hand was very stiff. He looked a little silly. Who asked you to play the hero? You knew that you couldn't beat him. Why didn't you call for my help earlier? Feng Jin smiled bitterly. His face was still a little pale, but it was much better than the night before. How can a man let a woman stand up for him? Jiang Pingji was secretly surprised. She said leisurely, "TSK, if that's the case, why did you let the servant call for me last night?" Feng Jin blinked his eyes. He did not care about his pride anymore. He supported his chin with one hand and looked at the stalemate on the chessboard. Because I suddenly realized that Lanting cannot be judged by ordinary women. All the men in the world are inferior to her. It is not embarrassing to ask for help. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Looking at the chessboard, Feng Jin thought for a long time before putting down a chess piece. He said, I thought that I would be able to avoid the disaster by helping the heir. I didn't expect that my good intentions would go to waste. He wouldn't have died if he didn't ask for it. This person is purely asking for it. I've just sent someone to inquire about the situation, and I've finally figured out what happened last night. Jiang Pingji's expression was cold. She was thinking about the chessboard in her mind, but she said, that heir is really spoiled. His family doesn't give him the moon if he wants the stars. When has he ever suffered a setback outside? He knew that the people who competed with him for the title of courtesan belle were from the northern borderline. But he did not back down after being reminded. Instead, he was fearless, and even provoked them on purpose. He ordered his servants to beat them up. In the end, the heir of the Count of Jinbei won the beauty. He won a great victory. Several people who competed with him for the title of courtesan belle were beaten to death. Beating people to death was a small matter. Among those who were beaten to death, one of them had a high status in the northern borderline. That was a headache. Now the northern borderline was unwilling to let go of this matter. They wanted an explanation from Dongqing. According to Feng Jin's experience, the emperor was now biased towards the northern borderline. As long as it did not endanger his throne, they could consider any conditions. At that moment, Lu Shi brought back terrible news. They had found a scapegoat. Coincidentally, it was someone Jiang Pingji knew, which was beyond everyone's expectation. It turned out to be Han Yu, one of Master Yuanjing's disciples. How did Han Yu get involved in this matter? Although Jiang Pingji was smart, she still could not figure it out. It had nothing to do with Han Yu. Even if they wanted to find a scapegoat, they couldn't just randomly find one. Chapter 283. Han Yu was really unlucky. Yesterday, he managed to persuade Cheng Jing to go to Ji Shan's hot spring with him. But they didn't know which hot spring Yuan Jing and the others went to. They had no choice but to send someone to ask, so they wasted a lot of time and happened to run into the prince of the Count of Jinbei. In terms of blood relations, Han Yu was not related to the prince of the Count of Jinbei. But if they were to be calculative, the two of them were still related. The prince of the Count of Jinbei was the son of a concubine, so his status was slightly higher when he was invited to be the prince, so he was raised by his legal mother. Unfortunately, the legal mother was Han Yu's father's sister, so she was Han Yu's aunt. He knew that his aunt didn't like the son of a concubine, but she had to be nice to him for the sake of the Count of Jinbei. Han Yu thought about his aunt, and was aware of the current situation in Dongqing. He was afraid that something bad would happen to him, so he tried to persuade him. The prince of the Count of Jinbei was arrogant and spoiled, but he still knew how to be respectful to Han Yu. However, it was useless to be respectful. Although he said that he wouldn't do anything stupid, his body still went to the brothel. Cheng Jing snorted at that place and didn't go. Han Yu felt a little uneasy, but he couldn't stop the prince, so he followed him. He hoped that nothing bad would happen with him watching. Coincidentally, the courtesan queen was selling her virginity at a high price. The courtesan queen was so beautiful that the prince of the Count of Jinbei was attracted to her. He wanted to buy her virginity at a high price, but unfortunately, he ran into the spoiled nobles of the northern borderline. So the two sides got into a fight. The prince of the Count of Jinbei killed someone in the chaos, because he had the advantage in numbers. Han Yu tried to stop him, but he was accidentally injured. It didn't matter if he was accidentally injured or not. What mattered was that the prince of the Count of Jinbei died in the belly of the courtesan queen. But the northern borderline didn't want to let it go. They insisted that it had something to do with Han Yu, and dragged him into the mess, hoping that Dongqing would hand over Han Yu and give them an explanation. Jiang Pingji suddenly asked after listening to Lu Shi's story, "Father, did anyone expose Han Yu's identity last night? For example, did they say that he was Master Yuanjing's disciple?" Feng Jin listened carefully at the side. He was deep in thought. When Jiang Pingji asked, he suddenly understood. "Lanting, do you mean that the northern borderline is targeting Master Yuanjing by holding on to Han Yu?" Jiang Pingji nodded and said with certainty, "The crown prince of the Count of Jinbei died suddenly in such a manner. He died a dishonorable death. The northern borderline should be very satisfied, but they didn't stop. Instead, they pushed Han Yu to the teeth of the storm and made things difficult for him. Of course, they have other plans. Han Yu was not a sensitive person like the prince of the Count of Jinbei. Why would the northern borderline target him for no reason?" Jiang Pingji's conjecture made sense. Lu Shi remembered something after being reminded by her. Mr. Yuanjing had a war of words with the barbarians of the three tribes of the northern borderline. He argued for what was right and took back the three cities. The peace envoy sent by the northern borderline was called Wu Lisir. He was one of the few barbarians who liked to read. It was just that this person was obstinate and self-opinionated. He had no respect for anyone. After reading a few classics and historical collections, he felt that he was well versed in the culture of the Central Plains. He was the one who suggested that the royal court of the northern borderline negotiate with Dongqing. He offered 3 more cities, surrender, and annual tribute coins. He was not good at learning, and was blindly arrogant. He gambled with Mr. Yuanjing, and lost the 3 cities. He was so angry that he died. When Jiang Pingji heard the name Wu Lisir, she suddenly thought of the barbarian general Wu Liba whom she had met before. Lu Shi seemed to see the doubt in her eyes. He suddenly smiled. Wu Lisir is Wu Liba's uncle. Their tribe is called the Wise in the northern borderline. They serve the royal court as strategists or generals. In the northern borderline, people eat raw meat and drink blood. They are backward and barbaric. They also advocate looting. Few people have brains. When Dongqing was founded, they didn't take them seriously. But the recent 2 generations of the royal family of the northern borderline are quite courageous. They gradually realize the importance of brains, so they focus on promoting the wise. I guess they still bear a grudge against Wu Lisir's death. Lu Shi had always looked down on the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. He also didn't think that they could rule the Central Plains, because the ratio of muscles in their brains was too high. A tribe that only knew how to destroy civilization, but didn't know how to preserve, create, or continue civilization was destined to be inferior. Feng Jin listened carefully. His eyebrows were tightly knitted. So, the northern borderline wants to make things difficult for Mr. Yuanjing? Lu Shi said. They probably want to show off. Wu Lisir was known as the wisest person in the northern borderline. There were even rumors that he was the reincarnation of Civil Star. He enjoyed a very high reputation in the northern borderline. If he wasn't so confident and determined that he would win, why would he be willing to bet the 3 cities with Mr. Yuanjing? In the end, Wu Lisir almost couldn't fight back. The northern borderline's face was swollen. It was a small matter that his face was swollen. Wu Lisir was so angry that he vomited blood on the spot. After he went back, he was depressed and died of anger within a few days. Mr. Yuanjing trampled on the faces of the 3 tribes of the northern borderline. He was able to live peacefully in Langyi. It was a skill. Feng Jin said worriedly. So Han Yu and Mr. Yuanjing, won't they be in danger? The northern borderline obviously wanted to take this opportunity to get back at them. Even if they didn't kill Mr. Yuanjing, they would kill Han Yu, or kill both of them to ruin their reputation. For scholars, reputation and dignity were far more important than their own lives. Not to mention Mr. Yuanjing, who was a famous teacher in the 9 prefectures. Compared to Feng Jin's worries, Jiang Pingji looked calm. She seemed to be enjoying a good show. She said, Huaiyu, do you think Mr. Yuanjing will be troubled by such a small thing? He has been famous for many years. Although she had only met Mr. Yuanjing a few times, and he seemed to be just an ordinary middle-aged man with profound knowledge and a kind personality, Jiang Pingji had always been a good judge of character. Although Mr. Yuanjing's appearance was getting old, his eyes were still young and full of vitality. Feng Jin was speechless. Jiang Pingji said with certainty, I believe that Mr. will solve this problem beautifully. In less than 3 days. Why 3 days? Because the evaluation would start in 3 days. And Han Yu would also have to participate. Unless Feng Jin was so unlucky that he hurt his hand and couldn't write, Mr. Yuanjing would never let his beloved disciple miss such an important life event. If he couldn't even do this, it would be a waste of the high praise and affirmation of the people in the world. Jiang Pingji also felt that there was no need for her to study under such a teacher. Chapter 284. Master Yuanjing looked at the koi fish swimming in the pond in the courtyard, and said with a gentle expression, It's good that you're back. Han Yu was fine, but he was a little nervous. I'm an unfilial disciple. I got you involved in this, and almost ruined your reputation. Seeing Han Yu kneeling on the ground, Master Yuanjing laughed. Get up. You've never been so obedient before. Han Yu was anxious. He didn't know what his master would give him in exchange for his safety, from the northern borderline. It would be terrible if this incident was exaggerated, and people said that Master Yuanjing secretly colluded with the northern borderline. It's okay. The letter I wrote will not be used against you. Why are you being so careful? Han Yu was relieved to hear that. Master Yuanjing waved at him and said, "Come closer to me." Han Yu did as he was told and moved closer. Master Yuanjing raised his right hand and pinched Han Yu's face. It hurt a little. After a long time, Master Yuanjing showed a complicated expression. Han Yu didn't know whether it was joy or worry. "You may leave. If there's nothing else, call Zixiao over." Master Yuanjing let go of his hand and turned to feed the koi fish in the pond without looking at Han Yu. Han Yu had never seen Master Yuanjing like this. He was anxious, but he still went to call Wei Ci. "You're different." He didn't expect Wei Ci to say that as soon as they met. "What's different?" Han Yu felt creeped out by Wei Ci's stare. "Nothing." Wei Ci lowered his eyes and frowned. "Since my master asked me to go, I shouldn't keep him waiting." Wei Ci sighed in his heart and left the confused Han Yu. The dark clouds in his heart gradually dispersed. Han Yu was puzzled. Why are they all so strange? The world is so big and full of strange things. The same person can change so much in just a few days. I feel like I've lived for decades in vain. Master Yuanjing noticed Wei Ci as soon as he approached. He said with emotion, "Zixiao, do you think this disaster is a blessing or a curse?" Wei Ci said, "For Dongqing, it's a disaster, not a blessing. For Wenbin, it's a blessing, not a curse." The accidental death of the Crown Prince of Jinbei Marquis was completely out of Wei Ci's expectations. He did not need to think to know that after this fuse was lit, Dongqing's situation in the next few years would be very grim. The pace of the chaotic world coming was much earlier than he remembered. Fortune and misfortune go hand in hand. Dongqing was unlucky, but Han Yu was lucky. Wei Ci had left Dongqing a long time ago, but he had kept in touch with his classmates through letters, so he more or less knew what had happened to them. Han Yu bore the misfortune of having his entire family wiped out. Based on his physiognomy alone, he was lacking in fortune. The inner courtyard had a calamity of love, and the palace of husband and wife was in decline. Because of the calamity of women, he was destined to die prematurely in his prime. In fact, it was true. When Han Yu was middle-aged, his wife's family rebelled against him and was quelled. After the incident was exposed, he wrote a confession letter and committed suicide by swallowing gold. Wei Ci had learned from Master Yuanjing and was quite accomplished in reading people's faces. Naturally, he could see the changes in Han Yu's facial features. Master Yuanjing smiled and said, "From the looks of it, Lu Shi is indeed the destined one." Wei Ci said in a soft but firm voice, "She is." Master Yuanjing was gratified at first, but then he showed a complicated expression. "She is still an unpolished jade. Although Lu Zhongqing has been guiding her, the effect is minimal. She is cruel and ruthless. If she doesn't change, I'm afraid she can't be a wise ruler." Wei Ci was silent. Could he say that Her Majesty had restrained herself a lot? She was not a wise ruler. She was not even close to being a wise ruler. The history books were mixed. Some people praised her for being open-minded, while others slandered her for being tyrannical. The former was debatable, while the latter was notorious. Master Yuanjing tilted his head and seemed to be thinking. For a man in his 40s or 50s, this action was suspected of maliciously acting cute, but it complimented the person who was unusually young and energetic. Wei Ci said softly, "She is an unpolished jade, not a stubborn stone. No matter how much a stubborn stone is polished, it is still a stubborn stone. But an unpolished jade is different." He didn't know what had changed, but he could see the changes in Jiang Pingji. Master Yuanjing smiled kindly after hearing that. He raised his hand and knocked on Wei Ci's head. "You don't mean what you say." Wei Ci lowered his head and looked embarrassed. The news that Han Yu was out of danger had spread throughout Shangjing. Those who paid close attention to the matter had received the news. I wonder what Master Yuanjing wrote that made the northern borderline given so easily. Feng Jin, the wounded man, had a comfortable life. Although he was a little depressed that he couldn't participate in the assessment, he quickly adjusted his mentality. While others were still writing furiously and reading through the night, He was drinking wine and fighting with Jiang Pingji on the chessboard. Jiang Pingji pouted and said, "The people in the northern borderline have muscles in their brains. Master Yuanjing's content must have hit the nail on the head to make such a boorish man bow down. The kind that slaps people in the face, and they don't dare to make a sound." Jiang Pingji's judgment was almost always correct, even about Master Yuanjing. Feng Jin was curious and said, "Then guess, what did he write?" "Guess? I guess there are 3 possibilities. First, it's a strategy to attack the city and subdue the enemy. It's a vital part of the hinterland of the northern borderline. But no matter how wonderful the strategy is, it needs to be executed by the military force. If Master Yuanjing presents a strategy to subdue the enemy in the northern borderline, it's mainly a deterrent. It's a silent message. Did you see that? Such a strategy can kill you. If Dongqing can't handle it, I can rely on a country that can kill you." Feng Jin was amused by Jiang Pingji's vivid simulation. He almost choked on his breath. Jiang Pingji mumbled, "Second, maybe it's a secret of the northern borderline?" Feng Jin finally stopped smiling and asked her, "What about the third?" He knew Jiang Pingji was talking nonsense, but she had a serious expression on her face. That was why he was amused. "Third, I read a piece of history at home. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline are the descendants of the Qiangwu tribe of the previous dynasty. They are brave and good at fighting. Each of them is fierce and ferocious. During the chaos of the 16 kingdoms, they burned, killed, and looted. They raped women and used women as food to satisfy their hunger. They even kept young girls in captivity to reproduce. In just a few decades, their population expanded from less than 200,000 to more than 3 million. Feng Jin listened carefully. He knew about this piece of history, but it had nothing to do with the topic, right? Jiang Pingji took a sip of tea to moisten her lips. She continued, "The Qiangwu tribe has a large number of elite rattan armored cavalry. The rattan armor is made with a special method by the Qiangwu tribe. It's lighter and more portable than normal armor. It's hard for swords and spears to penetrate it. The rattan armored cavalry is very difficult to deal with. They became their weapon in the northern borderline. In the end, they even wanted to use the power of the rattan armored cavalry to conquer the Central Plains. They wanted to dominate the Central Plains. In a short period of time, no one could stop them." Feng Jin thought about it and said, "I've heard of the rattan armored cavalry. In the end, 500,000 rattan armored cavalry were buried in Sichuan Plain. 500,000 was a bit exaggerated, but it was certainly not a small number. That was the history of the end of the 16 Kingdoms chaotic era. 500,000 rattan armored cavalrymen swept through half of the Central Plains. In the end, the prime minister of the Great Xia dynasty, Huangfu Fengmin, set fire to the Sichuan Plains. No one survived." Jiang Pingji suddenly smiled. "If I were Master Yuanjing, I wouldn't say anything else. I'll just say one thing. Do you remember the fire in Sichuan Plain that destroyed our ancestors' wild hopes of conquering the Central Plains?" Feng Jin was stunned for a while. He said, "Did the 3 tribes of the northern borderline rebuild the rattan armored cavalry?" Feng Jin thought about how scary the rattan armored cavalry was in the history books. He felt like his scalp was going to explode. Although the northern borderline was not a good place, it was rich in high-quality horses. It was not difficult to build a surprise army. Dongqing's terrain was flat. If the rattan armored cavalry broke through the northern borderline's defense line and entered the hinterland of Dongqing, it would be impossible to stop them. Jiang Pingji shook her head. She recalled the warriors of the northern borderline. Their armor was strange. She could not figure out what the problem was. She went back and flipped through the books that Cheng Cheng had collected. When she saw the history of Sichuan Plain, she remembered. Jiang Pingji said, "The rattan armored cavalry's weakness is too obvious. The Qiangwu tribe fell because of it. How could the 3 tribes of the northern borderline be so stupid?" In fact, according to Jiang Pingji's observation that night, the rattan armor that the 3 tribes of the northern borderline created did not seem to be very afraid of fire. If Master Yuanjing did that, it would at most be a warning to them. "You're too young to play games with me." Feng Jin was speechless. Chapter 285. Feng Jin had always thought of himself as the son of an aristocratic family with a good upbringing. He would not do anything rude under normal circumstances. Until he met Jiang Pingji. He coughed until his cheeks turned red. He awkwardly tidied up the messy crime scene in front of him. He looked a little embarrassed. Lanting, Master Yuanjing is the respected headmaster of the world. How can you? At this point, Feng Jin really couldn't say anything. He realized that he couldn't find the right words in his mind. Jiang Pingji pouted and said, "It's just a joke. I'm just saying it in a different way. I'm not trying to slander him. Why are you being so old-fashioned? Maybe if I said this to Master Yuanjing, he would agree with me." Feng Jin sighed. When it came to reasoning, he really couldn't win against the person in front of him. Master Yuanjing is broad-minded. He will not argue with a junior like you, Feng Jin said. Because of the severe injury on his hand, he would not be able to write for a while. Unfortunately, he missed the opportunity to participate in the assessment. Therefore, he had been very free recently. Jiang Pingji would ask him to play chess or chat to kill time. She did not want him to think too much. No matter if one was from a poor family or a gentry family, everyone studied hard for many years to rise to the top. Feng Jin did not show it on his face, but he was definitely not that carefree. Feng Jin knew Jiang Pingji's good intentions. "What are you doing?" After a game, Jiang Pingji asked Takshu to prepare a table in the courtyard. A big stack of bamboo paper lay on it. Writing from memory. "I have nothing to do anyway. Your mind is not on the board when I play chess with you. It's boring." Jiang Pingji knelt on a bamboo chair. Takshu lifted her sleeves slightly and helped her grind the ink. Feng Jin felt a little awkward when Jiang Pingji saw through his absent-minded state. He quickly calmed himself down and changed the topic. "Writing from memory? The task that Uncle Lu gave you?" As the general evaluation officer, Lu Shi went to the examination hall early to prepare. To avoid suspicion, he would not come back before the assessment ended. Feng Jin thought that since Lu Shi valued Jiang Pingji so much, he would definitely focus on her studies. It was normal for him to give her some homework. Jiang Pingji said, "No, I'm writing from memory Master Cheng's book collection." Mr. Cheng referred to Cheng Cheng. Previously, she had made a deal with Cheng Cheng. She provided the best bamboo paper, and Cheng Cheng would make a copy of his book collection for her. However, Cheng Cheng had collected so many books, more than tens of thousands of scrolls. It would take at least 1 or 2 years for him to finish copying. It wasn't that Jiang Pingji couldn't wait that long, but she was free now and could do things better. The more she immersed herself in this era, the more Jiang Pingji saw and understood. It was true that there were too many things in the ancient era that made her unhappy, such as the backward technology, the widespread illiteracy, the barbaric customs, the sexism. But it could not be denied that this era also had its brilliant aspects, such as the accumulated wisdom of the predecessors. She flipped through many books on the art of war, and found that many of the concepts in them were very similar to what she had learned. Some seemed superficial, but the essence was very similar. It should be known that her previous era, and this ancient era, were separated by at least 10 to 20,000 years. Jiang Pingji slowly withdrew the contempt in her heart and changed her attitude. She studied and studied seriously. If not, she wouldn't have spent so much effort to get Cheng Cheng's book collection. At the beginning of man, his nature is good. His nature is similar, but his habits are different. If he does not teach, his nature will change. Feng Jin sat at the side and watched her write these sentences. He thought about it carefully, but there seemed to be no familiar memory. However, the sentences were short and concise, and there was a profound truth hidden in them. His eyes lit up and he asked, "Who wrote this?" "It's simple and easy to remember. It's interesting." As soon as Feng Jin asked, a bunch of bullet screens floated across the virtual screen. Lao Siji Lianmeng. Young Feng Jin, this is the content of the 3-character classic. It's an enlightening textbook in ancient China. Yinyuejia Zhuge. The 3-character classic was written by Wang Yinglin in the Song dynasty. Even if I told you, you wouldn't know who Wang Yinglin is. Shengleodidai. I checked on Baidu. The author of the 3-character classic is Wang Yinglin. Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan. Wang Yinglin in the Song Dynasty. But Young Feng Jin's dimension doesn't have a Song Dynasty, right? In fact, according to the analysis of some gurus, the era that the streamer was in was similar to the Wei Jin dynasty. Apart from the answer, there were other bullet screens that said, "Not teaching is the father's fault. Not teaching is the teacher's laziness." The content was messy and varied. If Jiang Pingji didn't have a strong memory, she would have been confused. Facing Feng Jin's question, Jiang Pingji looked down and glanced at the bullet screen when he wasn't paying attention. She continued writing. "I don't know. The characters in the book can't be studied anymore. I just thought it was interesting, so I copied it." There was something wrong with the stream that day. It was as lively as a festival. When Jiang Pingji said that she wanted to copy some enlightening books and asked if they had any suggestions, the audience in the streaming room went wild. They didn't know about ancient classics, but Baidu definitely did. They could pretend to be a great scholar in front of the streamer with just a search. So Jiang Pingji wrote the 3-character classic on the first page. On the author's side, she wrote anonymous. She didn't write the original author because she didn't want people to find out who the legendary Wang Yinglin was. So, how did she know who Wang Yinglin was? Feng Jin didn't find Jiang Pingji's answer strange. Cheng Cheng's big boxes were too many. He also took a look at them from afar. The books were neatly arranged, which showed the owner's care. But many of the ancient books were incomplete, so it was impossible to find out who the author was. Mencius's mother chose a neighbor. Is this about Mencius's mother moving 3 times? Feng Jin stared at it without blinking. Many of the short and concise sentences came from the classic stories that people were familiar with. Every scholar knew about the story of Mencius's mother moving 3 times, but it was unheard of to summarize it in just 6 words. Faintly, Feng Jin felt something strange flash in his heart, but it disappeared too quickly. He didn't catch the feeling. Jiang Pingji frowned and complained, "You're disturbing me." Feng Jin frowned and stayed silent. Then he sat down obediently. "Good, it's much quieter now." Jiang Pingji continued to copy. The audience in the streaming room also helped her find all kinds of annotations. But they didn't copy and paste from the same webpage, so the content was very messy. She could only delete and edit, which wasted a few pieces of bamboo paper. Some audience enthusiastically helped Jiang Pingji. But naturally, there were also audience members who were watching the show and complaining. Chapter 286. Dora Among. At least the host didn't say that the 3-character classic was written by her. The author's name is anonymous. Xiao Wanzi's Wanzi. In fact, I think the streamer's way of doing things is smart. After all, in ancient times, scholars despised each other. If you really want to convince the other party, you need to have excellent skills and literary self-restraint. If you rely on plagiarism alone, the possibility of exposing yourself is too high. In fact, there were quite a number of viewers who urged Jiang Pingji to write her name on the book. After all, the 3-character classic was an enlightening book. If it were to be popularized in the future, almost every child would be exposed to it first. Her name would be immortalized for generations to come. However, her answer made the audience feel awkward. Host V. According to the federal law on the protection of original literature, the crime of plagiarism is very serious. The minimum sentence is 3 years, and the maximum sentence is life. Even if you're not sued by the original creator, 90% of the profits will belong to the original creator, and you'll have to pay a high amount of psychological damages. Apart from this reason, Jiang Pingji had another more important reason. Her gaze was fixed on the distant future, not the petty gains in front of her. The 3-character classic given by the audience in the streaming room was very short. It did not take Jiang Pingji long to finish copying it. She asked Takshu to dry it with an incense burner. Feng Jin had nothing to do, so he sorted the dried papers according to their contents and bound them into a booklet. Compared to the books he had read before, this short 3-character classic was very shallow, but easy to understand. Sigh, with the chaos of the 16 kingdoms, who knows how many treasures have been lost and their inheritance broken. Feng Jin read the three-character classic over and over again. As smart as he was, he vaguely knew the true purpose of this book. Because of Jiang Pingji's misdirection, he had already determined that this was the only copy that had been lost during the chaotic times of the 16 kingdoms. He did not know where Cheng Cheng had found it from. It was already difficult enough to maintain a relatively complete content, so he did not dwell on the question of who the author was. Because of this, Feng Jin admired Cheng Cheng's persistence even more. In his opinion, that was the true strength of a scholar, and not the mutual deceit and intrigue of the court. Jiang Pingji listened and casually said, "They are all unique copies. Once they are destroyed, or the people who know the contents are gone, the future generations will never be able to read the contents. If we can expand the scope and everyone has a copy, or if more people read it, it will be easier to pass it on." If an era wanted to progress, books could not only belong to one family or a small group of people. It just so happened that the current situation was that many precious, unique copies were in the hands of one or a few landowning households that had existed for a long time. If these landowning households met with misfortune, the unique copies might be lost or completely disappear, and the inheritance would be severed. There were many reasons for this phenomenon, but in Jiang Pingji's opinion, there were two main reasons. Firstly, the technique of papermaking had not yet matured. The bamboo slips were heavy and the paper was light. In other words, the technological productivity of society was insufficient, causing the cost of studying to be too high, and ordinary people could not afford it. If they couldn't even afford to eat, who would have extra money to study? Secondly, the monopoly of the special class on the inheritance of knowledge systems. The former was still manageable, but the latter was too difficult. If he wanted to break the current system of passing on knowledge and popularize education, it was inevitable that he would come into conflict with these aristocratic families that monopolized knowledge. Just by thinking about it, she could guess how great the pressure was. However, the road was made by people. As long as one had the heart, there was nothing in this world that was impossible. Feng Jin did not reply, but the way he looked at Jiang Pingji was different. Jiang Pingji noticed this detail, but she did not care. She continued to deal with the various annotations that gave her a headache. At that moment, she especially missed the virtual network and the powerful AI system. She had everything she wanted. Why would she need to copy it by hand? "System, are you dead?" She was multitasking. She read the bullet screen, copied the book, and typed on the system. The system snorted. "I'm already dead. If there's something, burn incense. If there's nothing, visit the grave." Jiang Pingji secretly clicked her tongue. She ignored it for a while, but the system's temper was getting worse. "Can't you copy the contents of the bullet screen? You see how hard it is for me to copy it by hand. Can you at least be considerate?" The system said coldly, "I'm sorry, host. Your streaming level is not high enough. You don't have the authority to do so. You have to be at least level 3. Jiang Pingji secretly glanced at the popularity points backstage and frowned slightly. Her accumulated popularity points had long exceeded the 1,000,000 mark. This number was just enough to upgrade a level 2 streamer to level 3. But if she did that, her popularity points would be used up. If she did that, it would undoubtedly put her in a position where she would be held back. The system had been coveting the points for a long time. It had tried to tempt her to spend them, but Jiang Pingji was not tempted. Thinking about that, she directly suppressed the idea of upgrading her level. She deliberately kept the system in suspense. After a long time she said, "Oh, then I'll just copy it by hand. I'll treat it as practicing my calligraphy." The system. Oh, was she deliberately teasing it? In order not to arouse Feng Jin's suspicion, Jiang Pingji not only copied the three-character classic in the annotations, but also wrote down from memory a few volumes of military books that Cheng Cheng had memorized. Coincidentally, Feng Jin's family also had such a book collection, but a very important half was missing. When he saw Jiang Pingji's complete copy, he immediately loved it and carefully read the missing contents. "Mr. Cheng is really a wonderful person." Feng Jin sighed from the bottom of his heart, as if he had obtained a treasure. "My father loved this book. He often lamented that he could not see the whole book in his lifetime. He searched all the houses, but could not collect it completely. I didn't expect that I would be able to see the whole book. Time passed quickly as Jiang Pingji copied and wrote. In the blink of an eye, it was time for the assessment. The assessment was the current selection system of Dongqing. It was similar to the 9-rank system that the audience was more familiar with, but there was a big difference between the two. The assessment was conducted every 3 years. The top 3 categories were family background, morality, and knowledge, while the bottom 3 were appearance, ability, and temperament. Family background was needless to say. It depended on one's father, mother, and ancestors. It was better to reincarnate than to learn well. Morality belonged to the category where one could cheat and get a good score by bribing the assessment officer. Knowledge, the general assessment officer would set the question and answer within a time limit. Appearance, in short, was based on the face and the way they dressed. When the time came, they would see a group of gorgeously dressed sissies. As for ability, this criterion was rather vague. Basically, it was a person writing an ability report and bragging about it. This item was linked to one's knowledge. If one bragged too much, one's knowledge would be rejected by the general evaluation officer, and there was basically no hope for one's ability. Temperament, this category was interesting. It completely depended on the general assessment officer's personal preference. If he liked you, he would give you a score. If he liked you, he would give you a score. If he disliked you, he would have a bad temperament. This was also the category where it was easiest to cheat. Looking at the above 6 categories, the general assessment officer played a very important role in it. It was different from the closed examination that the audience in the streaming room knew. The assessment was more like a large-scale royal gathering. As Lu Shi's son, Jiang Pingji naturally received an invitation. Looking at the invitation, Jiang Pingji spat out a sentence after a long time. I have never seen such a childish assessment. Chapter 287. Jiang Pingji, General of the Federation, female, former commander of the 7th Corps. Why was there a prefix of former? Because she had died in battle. However, the person who clearly remembered that she had died in battle had now opened her eyes. Don't let go of me. Go away, bastard. Help. The sound of crying filled her ears, causing her to have a splitting headache. She tried to open her eyes, but found that her vision was dark. She could faintly see figures moving in front of her, and there were also innumerable tragic cries, the sound of clothes being torn, and the sound of evil laughter mixed in. She felt that a long time had passed, but in fact, it was only a moment. When a malicious and unfamiliar aura approached, her body had already reacted subconsciously. Ouch! Jiang Pingji had already rolled over and stood up. She formed a claw with her right hand and broke the arm of a strange man. At that moment, she looked around coldly and found herself in a dark and dilapidated woodshed. The surrounding air was dry and suffocating, filled with all kinds of pungent smells. Thick dust floated in the air, which made her sensitive sense of smell suffer. Boss, this bitch. It was a strange language, but the emotions in the words revealed malice and hostility. Hearing this voice, she subconsciously frowned and raised her foot to step on the person whose arm she had broken. She stepped on his face to the ground and twisted it so hard that his whole face was covered with reddish-purple color. Jiang Pingji's eyes darkened. She exerted force on her foot, and with a soft sound, white brain matter mixed with blood burst out from the broken skull. The person was dead as a doornail. The movement in the corner startled the people who had lost their minds. Jiang Pingji looked at them coldly, and anger brewed in her chest. What did she hate the most? One was betrayal, and the other was treachery. Although she didn't know why she, who had died in battle, had woken up, the scene in front of her clearly told her that a group of beasts was bullying and humiliating more than 10 innocent and young girls. Some of them were even lying lifelessly on the ground. Animals! Damn it! When the 2 half-naked men saw this, they spat on the ground and stared at her with evil eyes. It was as if they wanted to see through the layers of clothes on her body and see the undeveloped body. However, when they saw the head that was crushed by her foot, All their charming feelings flew away. Bang bang bang. Jiang Pingji had always believed in the principle of using one's fist rather than one's mouth. The men in the room had obviously been branded as prisoners on death row by her. It was obvious that she had nothing to say to a few dead people. Her figure flashed, and her fist directly hit the vital point of one of the men's lower abdomen. The sound of bones cracking could be heard. Jiang Pingji's current strength was less than 1% of her peak, but it was no problem for her to deal with these small fries. Some of them tried to use the unfamiliar girls as shields, but she took advantage of the gap. She grabbed their hair bun and smashed their heads to the ground. Their heads were split open and they died. The thick blood soon filled the small and dim room. Whoa! After crushing the last person's neck, Jiang Pingji's cold expression loosened for a moment. She looked at the girls who were disheveled and had disheveled skin. Perhaps they were frightened. They huddled in a corner with tears on their faces. It was a very strange scene. She didn't even know what had happened to her. "Who are you?" she asked, but when the girls heard her, it was a strange pronunciation. They couldn't understand her at all. "They've been killed. You're safe." Jiang Pingji didn't like to talk much. Only her subordinates took the initiative to smile at her. She rarely took the initiative to communicate with others. After all, her mouth would offend people whenever she opened it. She could overturn people with a glance. Over time, she had offended many people, so she was too lazy to speak. Seeing the horror in the girls' eyes, as if they had seen a ghost, Jiang Pingji was silent. It seemed like there was a language barrier. She tried to switch to a few interstellar languages that she was familiar with, and spoke them one by one. Not only did the negative emotions in the girls' eyes not calm, but they became more intense. While communication failed, Jiang Pingji shrugged helplessly. Her head hurt. Just when she didn't know what to do, there was a noise outside the house. Then the door was kicked open. The accomplices of those bastards? Although this body wasn't her own, its quality was still affected. Her night vision was barely passable. The people who kicked open the door were a group of shirtless men who reeked of alcohol. They were dressed very strangely, and they spoke in a strange language. But it didn't matter. Even if Jiang Pingji couldn't understand them, she could distinguish the emotions conveyed in their words. They were all vile, malicious, and full of hostility and murderous intent. Before the bandits could react, Jiang Pingji had already stepped forward to harvest their heads without saying anything. Although her current body was very weak, she had the aura of a person who could hold the pass against 10,000 enemies. Almost every time she attacked, she could kill someone. Soon, the inside and outside of the house were filled with corpses, and each of the corpses had died a rather gruesome death. Turning around to look at the frightened girls, Jiang Pingji frowned, but she couldn't leave them alone. "You're safe. I won't let them hurt you." She squatted down and looked at the girls who were curled up. She tried to convey her kindness, but it didn't work. Unless it was something special, Jiang Pingji's patience had always been lacking. She could completely feel the girls' fearful gazes, as if they were looking at a monster, and their feelings of rejection. She was suddenly furious, but she could not vent her anger on a group of weaklings. She and those men seemed to be the source of the girls' fear. They kept wandering in front of them, and couldn't communicate at all. "Forget it. Let them calm down," Jiang Pingji murmured. She got up and left the small wooden house under the gaze of the noble girls. She didn't go far. She just cleaned up the rest of the bandits' village, and then found a tree nearby to lie down and keep watch for them. After dealing with the panic, Jiang Pingji had time to think about the strange things that happened to her. First of all, this body wasn't hers. It was too weak. It was a compliment. If it had been her in the past, she could have easily penetrated the opponent's front and back with one punch, not just shattering the opponent's internal organs. Secondly, this body was still very short. Maybe it was a dwarf. Why did she make such a judgment? Because she found that her sight was too low. She estimated that it was less than 1.5 meters above sea level. Until midnight, the girls in the house seemed to calm down. Jiang Pingji planned to communicate with them again, but the girls screamed in fear when they saw her. Some even threw things at her. Although she wasn't hurt, it still annoyed Jiang Pingji. "I can't communicate at all," Jiang Pingji dodged the debris and returned to the tree where she had been hiding. She kept her eyes open and watched the night. Although the girls were hostile to her, most of them were frightened. They were probably frightened. She was the leader of the army. She would not be calculative with the weak. After one night, the next dawn came. When the sun was high in the sky, some strange figures appeared at the foot of the mountain in the distance. Those people seemed to be looking for the girls. Jiang Pingji looked at them from afar, and then jumped into the forest. She wanted to find out what the hell this place was. Chapter 288. It was already late autumn, and the world was already playing the prelude to winter. Everything was covered in gold, and the air was filled with a sense of depression. However, the desolation of autumn did not affect the desire of the people in Shangjing to watch the fun. The wide road had been cleared, and both sides were guarded by armed officers and soldiers. They blocked the people who wanted to see the young Langjuns. When the auspicious hour arrived, more than 100 carriages with red silk hung on them slowly drove to the royal garden. The pedestrians on both sides were craning their necks. Hey, that Langjun is so good-looking, like a fairy. I wonder which family he is from. I don't care which family he is from. We are just ordinary people. This is the only time we can see him. More than 100 red silk carriages set off from the auspicious hour and paraded along the main street of Shangjing. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, revealing the Langjuns sitting inside. Each of them had red lips and white teeth. Their clothes were bright and beautiful, and their appearance was not bad. Occasionally, their eyes would wander and fall on the unmarried women. It was as if their souls could be sucked away. Even though there was a huge disparity in status, many unmarried women would dress up beautifully today. They wanted to talk but were too shy to flirt with the young Langjuns in the carriage, hoping to make a good relationship. Jiang Pingji sat in a private room by the window in a tea house. She could see the lively scene on the street if she turned her head slightly. It's like a courtesan parade. It hurts my eyes. She took a sip of tea, glanced at the carriages with red silk that happened to pass by, and silently looked away. The audience in the streaming room had the same idea as her. When they heard that there was a parade before the evaluation, and that they could see the high-quality young men who would participate in the evaluation, they all clamored and moved their stools over. They craned their necks and waited for the parade to begin. However, when the first carriage passed by, they all covered their eyes and whined that they were going blind. Ru fu ru zi wayangji. I am here to see handsome men, not to have my eyeballs removed. Host, you are so unkind. Lao Siji Lianmeng. If the host did not say that this is a serious activity, I would have thought it was a courtesan parade. Chow Lao Ai Ru wife. No, upstairs, which courtesan is so good-looking? Aren't they afraid of going bankrupt? Maishi Zhao Zilong. #smirk. Even Chow Lao, who has a strong taste, can't accept this. Jiang Pingji originally wanted to complain, but when she saw the complaints in the streaming room, she almost choked on the tea she was drinking. Although it was a little embarrassing, at least it was not too embarrassing. Feng Jin, who was sitting opposite her, was more miserable. He almost spilled the tea on his brand new clothes. If he had not swallowed the tea, he would have choked and spat it out. Lanting, you are really. I'm just telling the truth. They are much more ostentatious than the courtesan parading through the streets. Jiang Pingji said with a smile. Her eyes were like a pair of crescent moons. I thought it was a pity that you missed the assessment because of your hand injury. But when I think of you sitting in a red silk carriage like them, dressed gorgeously, wearing pink, red, and green clothes, I can't bear to look straight at you. The weather had completely turned cold, but that did not stop the people's passion for dressing up. Their clothes were mostly bright colors like lotus root pink, water green, lake green, dark blue, spring green, willow yellow, and scarlet. The lapels of their clothes were slightly loose, revealing some of their collarbones. Their hair was tied up with a jade crown and decorated with delicate silk flowers or blooming red plum branches. Their faces were covered with a thick layer of snow-white powder that was as white as a limestone wall. Their lips were mostly painted with bright red lipstick, giving people goosebumps all over their bodies. She could not understand the aesthetics of the people in ancient times. The people who were ugly to her were as beautiful as fairies in the eyes of the people downstairs. Jiang Pingji took a deep breath. She had to admit that the Langjuns were indeed very good-looking, but their makeup skills were too destructive. Jiang Pingji could not help but wonder if the poor kids had offended the stylist. Bah! Where did the stylist come from in this era? Feng Jin looked at Jiang Pingji helplessly. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. This is the fashion in Shangjing. The gentry's sons are after it. It doesn't matter if it's 100 people or 1,000,000 people. Ugly is ugly. The so-called beauty does not mean putting all the good things on your head. If that's the case, it's better to look at a vase. Jiang Pingji pouted, which made Feng Jin speechless. Feng Jin coughed and said, "Lanting is still young. You will understand when you grow up." Jiang Pingji glanced at Feng Jin, which made him feel uncomfortable. "If you think that's beautiful, why don't I see you wearing makeup?" Jiang Pingji looked at him from head to toe. He was wearing a green scholar's robe with layers and wide sleeves. His black hair was tied up neatly with a simple and natural crown. He looked refreshing. Feng Jin's fingers paused. He shook his head and suddenly said, "I'm born beautiful. I don't need any accessories." Jiang Pingji was speechless. Young Feng Jin, even if you're narcissistic, you're still so elegant and refined. Jiang Pingji was bored to death. She supported the window with one hand. The red silk carriages passed by the tea house one after another. The people seemed to have turned into star chasers. They stared at the Langjuns. Many girls even took off the sachets on their waists and threw them at the carriages when they saw the men they liked. Perhaps they were used to it, but many viewers in the streaming room seemed to be able to accept it. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Suddenly, there was a Mimi who felt sorry for the audience's aesthetics. Had it been destroyed? Just as she was about to doze off, the bullet screen in the streaming room suddenly surged out like a blowout. It almost covered every inch of the virtual screen. Jiang Pingji frowned. She didn't understand what these people who were obsessed with looks had taken the wrong medicine this time. Zayokwenkikiyuo. I saw my husband. He's so handsome. Yusubi Sangwashin. I feel like my eyes are healed. It's great O greater than over equal to V. Oh, Lao Ciji Lianmeng. I heard the sound of flowers blooming. Zhang Qingwai Jishui. Mama asked me why the screen of my phone is wet. I haven't licked it enough. Sans Hisong Shiningsher. It's blown out. The ascetic Adonis seems to have torn his clothes. She turned her head to look downstairs. She heard Feng Jin's laughter. This Langjun looks unfamiliar. Which family are you from? The man was wearing a dark blue robe with wide sleeves. The dark color did not make him look old. Instead, it made his snow-white skin look even more beautiful. His face was like jade, his hair was like splashes of ink, his lips were red without lipstick, and his eyebrows were green without any makeup. Unlike other people who looked at the people and smiled, he was sitting still. He closed his eyes and seemed to be deep in thought. His eyebrows were slightly furrowed. With her excellent eyesight, Jiang Pingji could even see his slender eyelashes. Chapter 289. Jiang Pingji suddenly smiled. She felt a little evil in her heart. She untied the perfume pouch on her waist and accurately threw it into the carriage. Feng Jin was stunned, but Jiang Pingji moved too fast for him to stop her. Feng Jin was not the only one who was shocked by her. Wei Ci, who was silently reciting the mind-clearing formula in the horse carriage, felt something strange in his arms. He could not help but open his eyes and saw a delicate yellow sachet. Although it was made for a man, it looked very similar to a woman's and looked somewhat familiar. He picked it up. There was a small she embroidered on the corner. His heart tightened, and his pupils shrank. He suddenly turned his head to look out of the car. With just a glance, he discovered a familiar figure leaning against the window, revealing a somewhat evil smile at him. Wei Ci turned his face expressionlessly. He clenched his teeth and held the sachet tightly in his right hand. He curled the sachet into a ball until his knuckles turned white and blue. His chest was in turmoil. Jiang Pingji laughed. Her eyes flashed with interest. Lanting, are you interested in that Langjun? Feng Jin watched Jiang Pingji's sachet fall into the strange Langjuan's carriage. He could not stop her. Why do you say that? Jiang Pingji turned to look at Feng Jin and said, I just feel that he is pure and not pretentious. He is very different from other coquettish bitches. Didn't Huayu notice? That woman is as beautiful as Huayu. Feng Jin was speechless. Suddenly, he could not look at the term natural beauty in the eye. He took a deep breath and said, Lanting playing around is one thing. How can you give a sachet to an outsider? Don't worry. I know that Lang Jun. I was just joking. He won't mind. I was just scaring him. Even if Wei Ci did mind, he would not have the guts to say it. She was very sure that she had never met Wei Ci before she came to Shangjing, but he seemed to have a good understanding of her. He could even be considered to be familiar with her. Not familiar with Lu Shi, but familiar with Jiang Pingji. That was interesting. She could not help but want to tease him. She saw others throw handkerchiefs and sachets, so she did the same. Jiang Pingji smiled and took a sip of tea. Feng Jin looked at her and felt tired. The people in the carriage after Wei Ci were all acquaintances whom she had met once or twice. Unlike the Langjuns who grew up in Shangjing, the Langjuns in Shangjing were used to dressing up luxuriously. There was a sense of decadence in their extravagance. Master Yuanjing was a decent teacher, and the disciples he taught were decent as well. They did not dress as nobly as Shangjing Gizi. Instead, they looked more like scholars. More importantly, compared to those coquettish cheese, these people were more in line with the aesthetics of the livestream viewers. Every time a carriage passed by, the viewers in the live broadcast room would howl for a long time, wishing they could crawl over to hug and kiss the carriage. Zhang Qingwai Jimisiju. I really want to cross over. That way, I can hug the streamer's thigh and look at beauties. Maybe I can become a fair, rich, and beautiful woman with the help of Tang poems, song lyrics, and Yuan songs. I can marry a tall, rich, and handsome man and reach the pinnacle of my life. Sanqui Liangzhu light wine. #despise. Transmigrating. Look at your own face first. In ancient times, people were obsessed with beautiful faces. Even if you were the reincarnation of Li Bai and Du Fu, you would not be able to change your fate if you did not have a beautiful face, let alone Tang poems and song lyrics. Zhang Qingwai Jimisiju. #clutching my chest and vomiting blood. Sob, the person above me. You are such a blow to my confidence. The red silk carriages drove into the royal garden one by one. As soon as they got close, a strong fragrance of flowers floated over the high courtyard wall and went straight to the tip of their noses. Wei Ci bent over and got out of the carriage. He had regained his composure. He did not know where the light yellow sachet went. Han Yu asked knowingly, Zixiao, I seem to have seen someone throw a sachet into your carriage. Who is so bold to do that? Wei Ci looked indifferent and said, just a naughty and rude person. Maybe it was because of the ordeal that Han Yu had gone through. He looked more mature than before, but his eyes were still bright and cheerful. If it were not for the inappropriate occasion, he would drag Wei Ci aside and interrogate him. Don't let Lu County Chief hear what you said. Otherwise, Zixiao will not pass the assessment this year, Han Yu said. Wei Ci still looked indifferent. The noblemen who were able to make it to this stage were basically selected from all over Dongqing. They were considered the elite talents of this generation. If there were no special circumstances, they would be able to pass the assessment. It was just that there were differences in rankings. If Wei Ci, with the title of Master Yuanjing's disciple, got the last place, it would not only be a disgrace for him, but it would also ruin Master Yuanjing's reputation. As far as he could remember, this was the first time that Wei Ci participated in the assessment. When he was parading on the street, the bustling scene made him feel like time and space were disordered. He only woke up from the memory when he saw the small sachet thrown into the carriage by the malicious owner. I don't know what kind of questions Lu County Chief will give. Master said that the future is unpredictable. He asked us to wait and see and deal with it randomly. Han Yu sighed. With Master Yuanjing's ability, he could more or less see some clues, but he did not disclose it to his students. Wei Ci listened with a cold face. If the situation had not changed, he would have known the questions for this year's assessment. However, it was a pity that the person who came up with the questions was not the current General Evaluation Officer, Lu Shi, who knew what questions he would come up with. It is not difficult to guess according to Lu County Chief's personality. Lu Zheng and Cheng Jing were talking in a low voice. Hearing their conversation, Lu Zheng lowered his voice and said, "You can guess." Han Yu looked at Lu Zheng with a smile. Master Yuanjing once said that Lu County Chief is a pragmatic person. The questions are mostly related to the way of governance, Lu Zheng guessed. Most of the previous assessments were about poems and couplets. A group of people were there to mourn the changing seasons or sing praises. According to the rumors, Lu Shi was more pragmatic. The assessment was to select suitable young talents for Dongqing, not to select flattering followers. Lu Shi should be different from the previous general evaluation officers. Not to mention other things, the other Langjuns tried every means to find out Lu Shi's preferences. Even their outfits were much thinner. Yes, if it was not to cater to Lu Shi's preferences, Jiang Pingji and the audience in the streaming room would have seen a more gorgeous parade. Wei Ci did not participate in this topic. He just listened quietly. Han Yu asked him, "Zixiao, you are most concerned about these things. Don't you have any opinions?" He lowered his eyes and said, "If it was not for my master's request, I really did not want to come here. I don't care what questions Lu County Chief asks. As long as he was not at the bottom, it was more or less acceptable. Yes, he was just there to go through the motions. According to the current selection standards of Dongqing, even if Wei Ci was full of talents, he would not be appointed." Han Yu seemed to have thought of something. He sighed and did not insist. On the other side, Jiang Pingji and Feng Jin also arrived at the royal manor. A fragrant wind assaulted them. Although it was late autumn, the royal manor was still filled with flowers. The unknown trees were decorated with bright red flowers. That was where the strong fragrance came from. Chapter 290. Although the royal garden was luxurious, it couldn't compare to the flowers that were blooming all over the mountain. People were dancing under the trees. Young Langjuns dressed in red and green, with makeup and flowers on their hair, walked among them. They took their seats one by one. At a glance, they were even more beautiful than the blooming flowers. Lu Shi wore a snow-green robe and a lacquered gauze crown. He held a rui in his hand. He sat upright with a cold expression on his face. He was already over 30 years old, but he didn't look any worse than those young men. He had a maturity and steadiness that they didn't have. He looked coldly at the Langjuns who came together. Some were smiling, some were frowning, and some were nodding slightly at him. There were hundreds of different expressions, and all of them were romantic. Only the obscure fawning was the same. They were like peacocks spreading their feathers, and they couldn't wait to show off their most magnificent side. Time passed and his eyes drifted. He seemed to have returned to decades ago, when he was one of those nobles. However, he always remembered that he looked calm and composed at that time. He played the zither, talked about poems and commented on calligraphy and paintings, but he was actually sweating profusely. It was as if his heart was being threatened by an invisible hand. If he was not careful, it would be squeezed tightly. He was anxious and panicked. When the assessment was over, he went home in a panic and poured out his uneasiness and timidity to Amin. Amin stared at him with hidden bitterness. To this day, he still remembered Amin's angry complaints. How pretentious, what kind of test is this? Lu Shi was confused. Chief Lu, all the Langjuns have taken their seats. We can begin. While he was thinking, his colleague beside him carefully woke him up. Lu Shi opened his slightly tipsy eyes, as if he had just had a good sleep. Looking at the nobles who were more beautiful than the scenery, Lu Shi smiled and said, "Let's start over there." The assessment in Dongqing took place every 3 years. The information about the family background in the top 3 categories had long been sent to Shangjing from other places. Lu Shi arrived in Shangjing a little late. He had spent the past few days on this. He read through the information of all the candidates for the assessment and ranked them according to their family background, status, and identity in their families. He gave them the corresponding scores. They were roughly categorized as superior, medium, and inferior. Although there were only about 100 people participating in the assessment, they were all carefully selected from all over Dongqing. Each of them had a strong family background and could not afford to offend any of them. If there was a huge dispute over the ranking, Lu Shi would have offended their backer. As mentioned before, morality, appearance, and temperament could be used to bribe the examiners. Lu Shi had received a lot of bribes and benefits in the past few days. Whether it was real money or antiques, those people's generosity had left Lu Shi speechless and widened his horizons. No wonder everyone wanted to be a general evaluation officer. Even if they didn't start their business for 3 years, once they started their business, they would be able to make a living for 30 years. Ability, which was the ability to boast, had already been submitted to him. Lu Shi had also seen all of them. Most of them were flashy and boastful. Why did they say that it was flashy but without substance? Take a chestnut for example. A person with a thin waist, who took 5 distilled powder all day, which caused his skin to be too delicate. He could only wear soft old clothes and couldn't even take a shower. Yet he could draw a bow that could kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and fight 2 tigers alone. Wasn't that funny? Oh, maybe it was the kind of tigress that sweated the silk clothes, and knocked the jade pillow with a golden hairpin? Lu Shi inadvertently became an experienced driver, and drove a car in an artistic manner. It was called an assessment, but it was more like a large-scale gathering with a purpose. All the Langjuns were showing off their talents. Those who dared to show off their talents all had something up their sleeves. Lu Shi had thought it was boring at first, but now he was more into it. The atmosphere was very harmonious. As mentioned before, the assessment was more like a large-scale gathering of the royal family. Those who participated were not only the nobles, but also many important ministers and their families. The emperor, his concubines, princes and concubines would all be there. Although there were many people, it didn't seem noisy. Lu Shi didn't remember such a scene. How would Jiang Pingji, who was a future general, know how to deal with it? Fortunately, as the legitimate son of the Feng family, Feng Jin had been through all kinds of big events since he was a child. He could still talk and smile with others with Jiang Pingji, who was a burden. He was like a butterfly flying through flowers. He greeted and talked to everyone he met, and didn't forget to introduce Jiang Pingji to them. They were all a group of wily old foxes. Even if they hadn't heard of Jiang Pingji before, they didn't dare to ignore her just because she was the son of Lu County Chief. Jiang Pingji followed Feng Jin, and did know many people. Lanting, you don't like to talk to people? Feng Jin sat down in his seat according to his status. He tilted his head and asked her. Jiang Pingji sighed and said, "No, I just feel that the circle of nobles is really messy." Feng Jin was dumbfounded. The circle of nobles was really messy? He could recognize the 4 words separately, but he couldn't understand them when they were put together. However, as smart as he was, he could figure it out just by looking at the literal meaning. Why do you say that? Feng Jin couldn't help but laugh. He was not prepared for Jiang Pingji's shocking words, so he moved closer to her and lowered his voice. Nowadays men are actually so popular? Even if she came from the future world, which was abnormally open, not everyone was gay. However, after meeting so many people with Feng Jin, she sincerely suspected that she had entered a world of pornography. She even had an illusion that she was probably the only straight man in the world. Bah, she was a woman. Feng Jin's snow-white skin was dyed a little red. He said uncomfortably, "Can your eyes not look around?" Jiang Pingji clicked her tongue. "Are you asking me to close my eyes and not look?" When she saw the other party, her brain would automatically think and analyze. Could she be blamed for that? It was a professional habit that she had developed over the years. It wasn't something that she could change even if she wanted to. Feng Jin choked, and had a strange expression on his face, but he still added in a low voice. "The relationship in the court is messy. As long as it doesn't affect the continuation of the family line, it's very common to become brothers." Many sworn brothers would even buy betrothal gifts for the other half, so that the other half could get married and have children to continue the family line. After all, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and having no descendants was the worst. Longyang's division of peaches was already against the family line. If one of them died because of this, how could he face his ancestors 100 years later? Jiang Pingji squinted her eyes, which made Feng Jin feel uneasy. There was always an indescribable feeling in his heart. I'm not interested in this kind of hobby. Lanting, you don't have to look at me like this. It's weird. It was usually fine, but when Jiang Pingji stared at him seriously, Feng Jin always had the strange illusion that his whole body was being seen through. Jiang Pingji giggled and said to him, "Why you as upright and upright? Why are you afraid of me?" "I'm not afraid. I just don't like it." Feng Jin said helplessly, "Sit properly. If others see you like this, they will most likely blame County Chief Liu for not raising you well." Suddenly, he remembered something and reminded her. "Lanting, remember not to run around. The royal villa is not like your own home. Every move of yours is being watched. Don't talk and don't do anything. Just be quiet, okay?" Chapter 291. Jiang Pingji's words could not be trusted, including the punctuation. Although Jiang Pingji had never participated in a large-scale party in the ancient times, she had participated in one in the previous era. As the most powerful military leader in the Federation, she had people supporting her wherever she went. For important banquets of the Federation, the organizers would habitually send her an invitation. Whether she would attend or not depended on her mood. After comparing the parties in the two eras, she realized that regardless of whether it was the ancient times or her era, it was nothing more than the same routine. However, as the commander of the army, she was treated with respect and had to submit to others. Now she was just a shrimp. Her ears listened to the moving music, and her eyes watched the graceful dance. Jiang Pingji smiled faintly. Being invisible had its advantages. At least she did not have to deliberately remember who someone was. She did not have to think about someone's family background and other human relationships. Then, she had to think about how she should talk to the person. It was so tiring to even talk. She was so bored. It's hard for you to watch so intently. Are their dances that good? Jiang Pingji glanced at the bullet screen. The audience's comments were focused on the dancers' bodies, faces, and skin. As for the dance moves, they all felt that it was too slow. It felt like an old man or an old woman practicing Tai Chi in the park. It was not as good as the square dance. Although she did not know what Tai Chi was or what square dance was, judging from the bullet screen, it should not be easy to describe. The body turns and waves the sleeves lightly. The eyebrows are furrowed. Feng Jin looked at the dancers who were dancing gracefully. He clapped his hands and smiled without turning his head. Waist like a willow, voice like an oriole. Hiss. This feeling needs to be savored carefully. Lanting is impatient. You should calm down. Jiang Pingji was dumbfounded. She looked at Feng Jin, who was engrossed in watching, then at the dancers, and then at the audience in the streaming room. Suddenly, she felt that the audience in the streaming room and her aesthetic standards were in the same dimension. Feng Jin was already a god. The dance moves are pretty good, but I prefer the enchanting ones. Fair skin, long legs, big breasts, and perky buttocks. The audience in the streaming room unanimously agreed with what she said. Zhang Qingwei Jishui Jishui. I like such honest and sincere streamers. Pai Pai Hai Wa Shou. Actually, I like hot bodies too. I only pay attention to hot female streamers. I don't watch those without bodies. The streamer is the only one who doesn't rely on her body. She relies on her inner qualities to attract me. You are the most special. Shushu takes you to see goldfish. Have a safe journey. #Candlestick. The little angel in the streaming room agreed with Jiang Pingji's point of view. But Feng Jin, an orthodox male from ancient times, was not so open-minded. Her snow-white face was dyed red, and it was obvious that she was embarrassed. Vulgar. Feng Jin was Feng. Jiang Pingji understood that a young man like Feng Jin, even if he liked girls with nice skin, he would not say it out loud. She snorted coldly. Why you're lying. How am I vulgar? Feng is Don, I Feng Hua. Dozen. Don Feng. Dozen. Jiang is with Jiang, I Feng colon. Li Jiang Feng Jiang. Feng colon Jiang, I Jiang. Jiang Pingji misinterpreted his words. Feng Jin was no match for her. He gritted his teeth and said, Lanting, do you dare to let Chief Liu hear what you said? Jiang Pengji retorted indifferently. Why you? Have you forgotten who I went to the brothel with? Feng Jin. Who else could it be? Your father, Lu Shi. Fine, he lost. No. Feng Jin suddenly remembered that the girl next to him was a girl, not a boy. Thinking of this, his expression became thought-provoking. He looked like he was constipated. Chief Lu, your daughter is like this. Why don't you take care of her? Lu Shi said. What can I do? I'm also desperate. Not to mention going to a brothel. Even if my daughter went to a small restaurant in the south courtyard, I would accompany her. Jiang Pingji looked at the hopeless Feng Jin. She smiled and squinted her eyes. There were all kinds of bad things about the ancient times. But one thing was for sure. The people were conservative. Take Feng Jin for example. No matter how serious he was still a teenager. He was very young. As long as Jiang Pingji put down her pride and put on a do-whatever-you-want attitude, Feng Jin would not be able to do anything to her. Feng Jin drank a lot of wine and looked embarrassed. He asked a maid to lead him to the toilet. Jiang Pingji saw him leave and looked at the empty seat next to her. She raised her eyebrows and stood up. She was quite curious about the royal courtyard of the ancient era. As a qualified streamer, she had to satisfy the audience's needs. Learning from Feng Jin's elegant speech, Jiang Pingji successfully hooked up with a maid in palace attire to lead her away from the banquet. Zhang Qingwai Jishui. Granny, I just want to visit the ancient royal garden. I don't want to visit the toilet. If you want to go to the toilet, I don't mind. Jiang Pingji's mouth twitched when she saw the comment. She never thought that the audience in the ancient times would have such hardcore tastes. I wonder if this lady knows where the Langjuns who are participating in the assessment are? I have a few good friends who are in this batch. Looking at the time, the assessment should have started for some time. But I still feel a little anxious in my heart. I wonder if Miss can lead the way for me. The palace maid pursed her lips into a smile. Langjun, you are calling me a slave. The rules of the royal garden are strict. Everyone has their own way. A lowly slave like me is not qualified to go there. If you want to go, I can show you the way. You will see it after passing through the garden. Then I'll have to trouble you. The garden in the imperial garden was not something the Lu Manor small garden could compare to. The garden was filled with exotic flowers and plants. Even though it was late autumn, the garden was still blooming with beautiful purple and red flowers. The bright colors dispelled the bleakness and made the garden more lively. It was said that the imperial garden in Shangyang Palace was more than 10 times bigger than this one. Usually, only the emperor, the concubines, and the princes and concubines could go there. No one else could get close. Jiang Pingji was not qualified to step into the garden of the royal family, if it was not for the special occasion, let alone walk around casually and admire the beautiful scenery. Jiang Pingji did not even have the right to enter the garden of the royal family. Ah, Your Highness, be gentle. Ah. Jiang Pingji found a secluded place and prepared to rest on an artificial hill. A member of the audience who studied biology in the streaming room expressed his interest in the unfamiliar plants in the garden and wanted to observe them up close. He asked Jiang Pingji if he could stay in the garden for a while. It would be even better if she could zoom in and let him observe them carefully. She thought that she had nothing to do, so she agreed. However, after she closed her eyes for a while, she heard a coquettish gasp from below. The gasp of a man and a woman was getting louder and more urgent. Jiang Pingji, who was sitting above, was speechless. The audience in the streaming room was even more direct. Chapter 292. According to Jiang Pingji's 5 senses, she naturally knew that there were 2 people in the mountain stream, under the rockery. However, they were well behaved at the beginning. Maybe they were a couple who had committed to each other and took the opportunity to confess their feelings. She was also very confident in her concealment skills. She was sure that she would not reveal her tracks and scare the couple. She was very pure, but the old driver was skilled in driving. He drove the car so suddenly that it caught her off guard. The couple did not say anything and could not wait to hug each other. They tore off each other's clothes. Not long after, they took off their clothes one by one. They went straight to the third base. Their actions were intense. The pearls and jadeite on the girl's head hit the rockery wall, making a slight knocking sound. Jiang Pingji was stunned on the spot. The audience in the streaming room was clamoring to see the live version. Zhang Qingwai Jamisiju. Ow ow ow, Granny, can you adjust the camera angle of the live stream room? I can only hear the sound, but can't see the image. It feels weird. An excellent live stream room should have excellent sound and color. Lao Siji Lianmeng. This car is so unexpected. Even if I'm an old driver, I almost drifted off the curve of the mountain. Jiang Pingji quickly calmed down. She did not agree to the request of the audience in the streaming room, nor did she leave the spot. As a result, the pair of lovebirds, who were secretly looking for an opportunity to have sex in the wild, were completely unaware. They were having fun, and from the sounds, they seemed to be playing different tricks and positions. They were completely unaware that Jiang Pingji was half lying on the path created by the rockery, as well as 10,000 spectators. Jiang Pingji deeply felt that even though she was not the primary student of Grim Reaper that the audience spoke of, and people died wherever she went, she had something in common with that person. It seemed that she could encounter interesting things wherever she went. This time, she even encountered a couple having sex in the wild. Host V. The Dongqing royal family is doomed. The emperor has an affair with the wife of his minister and his father's concubine. The son has an affair with another son's future wife on a day like the assessment. They are not afraid of people coming and going. They are caught red-handed. The audience in the streaming room looked at the bullet screen and was a little confused. Zhang Qingwai G2A. #despise. Granny, are you secretly watching? Otherwise, how would she know who the couple is? Jiang Pingji secretly rolled her eyes. She did not want to be in the limelight. However, no one in the live stream room could keep up with her brain, so she could only accommodate the other party. Host V. Judging from his voice, the man is Wuma Jun. I've met him a few times, and he will become my brother-in-law. The expressions of the viewers in the live streaming room cracked. F*CK, Wuma Jun. How dare he make a cuckold of the streamer's sister in front of the streamer? Jiang Pingji sent another bullet screen. Host V. The woman is from the northern borderline. Why do you make such a judgment? Because Wuma Jun just ripped off the other party's dress. The sound of fabric tearing is not ordinary silk or satin. This is a special fabric that only a few nobles in the northern borderline can wear. I've read about this in a book called Unofficial History. The author was so bored that he tore different kinds of fabrics and carefully recorded the difference in the tearing sound. Because of the intense movements, the pearls and jade necklaces on the woman's head knocked against the stone wall. The quality of the fabric can also be heard. The woman's clothes were stripped off. The action was so intense that the pearls and jade necklaces were scattered on the ground. Jiang Pingji could figure out how many pieces of jewelry fell on the ground, and whether the quality was good or not just by listening to the sound. Combining the above points, she thought about the people from the northern borderline who came to Dongqing recently. Naturally, this identity of his was obvious. Lao Siji Lianmeng. I don't know. Should I say that the streamer has good ears, or that she has seen too many things? She seems to know everything. He was having sex, but she could hear so many things that had nothing to do with the topic. Her face was cold. She felt that she and the streamer were not from the same world. Oh, that's not right. They were not from the same world. Although Jiang Pingji was listening to an overflowing drama at a close distance, her expression remained normal. Her eyes were still clear and bright. She was not affected by the wild mandarin ducks below at all. Some veterans in the streaming room could not help but call for Miss Five Fingers, just by listening to the sound. In the eyes of the audience, Jiang Pingji was too cold, but it was normal for her. If a well-trained genetic warrior could not even control his physiological reactions, he would have been kicked out of the ranks of genetic warriors long ago. After about the time it took to burn 2 joss sticks, the wild mandarin ducks below finally stopped. They hugged each other and panted. At that moment, a member of the audience jeered and asked Jiang Pingji, "You dialed his phone is switched off. Streamer, you listen to the show for free. Don't you have anything to say?" Host V. Trash. Looking at these 2 short words, Many of the veteran audience members revealed a meaningful smile. The pair of wild mandarin ducks below calmed down for a while. Then, there was the sound of them putting on their clothes quietly. Your Fourth Highness, and Yaina will remember what happened today deeply. Your Fourth Highness. Haha. It was indeed Wuma Jun. Jiang Pengji sneered as she listened. One was the fourth prince of Dongqing, and the other was the princess of the northern borderline, who was about to become the second princess consort. They came to the rockery on such a special day. They were really too much. What did the fourth prince want to do? Wuma Jun had woken up from what had happened just now, but his voice was still a little hoarse. Are you really going to marry my second brother? He can't give you the honor you deserve, Wuma Jun said disdainfully. The princess of the northern borderline, whose name was Yaina, sighed softly and said, My father wants me to marry your second brother, so I have to marry him. Which woman in the world hasn't gone through life like this? They are all pitiful people who have no choice. I have no regrets since I gave my chastity to you early on. Jiang Pengji pouted. Princess Yaina was also good at acting. She did not even have a draft when she spoke. She boasted as soon as she opened her mouth. Your Fourth Highness, let's accept it. From now on, I'm your second sister-in-law. We don't have to keep in touch secretly anymore. If someone finds out, they will mistakenly think that the northern borderline is disloyal to Dongqing, and that the marriage is just a cover-up. We will be the sinners of both countries. Jiang Pengji had thought that the princess was extraordinary. Now, it seemed that she was not as good as her reputation. No, her reputation was not as good as her reputation. At the end of the day, she just wandered between different men and played with power. The northern borderline wanted the princess to sow discord between the second prince and the Count of Jinbei's residence, so that the relationship between the emperor and the prince would be at loggerheads. It would be best if Dongqing would never have a day of peace. Unexpectedly, the princess had already destroyed the relationship between the two princes before she married into the northern borderline. Logically speaking, Wuma Jun was ambitious. Although he was young, he liked to plan before taking action. He was not like a brainless pig. How could he be easily hooked by Princess Yaina and believe in her affectionate performance? She frowned, but she forgot that most men nowadays regarded women as vassals and objects. Who was he referring to as having long hair and short knowledge? Princess Yaina's acting skills were too good, and Wuma Jun was too conceited. Chapter 293. Jiang Pengji did not intend to show herself. Naturally, she would not let others discover her traces. She kept a sneer on her lips as she listened to the man and woman being lovey-dovey to each other. Due to the obstacles of reality, they had to go their separate ways and forget about each other. To be honest, a more active gossiper could write a short story about sadomasochistic love in minutes. Jiang Pengji lifted her eyelids. All kinds of sadomasochistic love stories had popped up in the streaming room. Some experienced players who were proficient in all kinds of romantic plots could accurately guess the conversation between Princess Yaina and Wuma Jun. They echoed each other. It was simply a trap. If it were not for the situation, Jiang Pengji would have laughed out loud. People who thought they were smart were always the stupidest. In a sense, the man and woman below were a perfect match. Jiang Pengji was happy to watch a good show, but the audience in the streaming room did not quite understand. Canteen Daffin Auntie. Granny, isn't Wuma Jun your sister's future husband? He's cheating on you in front of you. Don't you have any temper? I'm looking forward to your sister complex acting up and beating up Wuma Jun and his little mistress. Not only was the audience looking forward to it, but the entire audience in the streaming room was looking forward to it. They had long been accustomed to Jiang Pengji's unreasonable and protective style. Even if she was a concubine's sister, in ancient times, she would be the daughter of a concubine, or an illegitimate daughter, or a mistress in modern times. However, this was ancient times. Concubines' daughters also had human rights. It was justifiable. They did not think about how Jiang Pengji would fight for justice for the daughter born of a concubine. However, Wuma Jun was having sex with another woman in broad daylight before marrying her. He was a jerk. According to the streamer's temperament, she would definitely come forward and beat him up. Jiang Pingji smiled. After testing Lu Shi in Chongqing Alley, she had basically figured out the identity of the daughter born of a concubine in the manor. In other words, the daughter born of a concubine was not on the same side as the Lu family from the moment she was born. It was impossible for them to be on the same side in the future. As for sibling love or brotherly love, there was no trace of it at all. Lu Shi had taken this into consideration. He had secretly instructed the second wife and Madame Dai to separate Lu Shi from the daughter born of a concubine. They had never interacted with each other before, so naturally, there was no relationship between them. Lu Shi knew that the mistress's daughter had an unusual identity and was most likely on the opposite side. Lu Shi intended to marry the mistress's daughter to Wu Majun. It was obvious that he had dug a trap for the kid to jump into. Under such circumstances, Jiang Pingji still stood up for the mistress's daughter. She had nothing better to do. Host V. You want to mess with Wu Majun and Inyina? Heh, it was only a matter of time. The path that Jiang Pingji wanted to take. These two were stumbling blocks. Perhaps they were small gravel or pebbles. Sooner or later, she had to kick them away. However, the reason couldn't be to vent his anger for a concubine sister, who had nothing to do with him. Obviously, the audience in the streaming room liked to join in the fun, without using their brains. No one could tell that Jiang Pingji was playing with words. Princess Inyina watched Wu Majun leave the rockery affectionately. She stayed where she was and carefully cleaned up her appearance. Then, she left with a normal expression. Jiang Pingji continued to sit there, unmoving like a mountain. After a few breaths, Inyina, who had already left, returned. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. The princess, who was expected by the royal family of the northern borderline, was quite capable. Inyina didn't notice her, but she was very suspicious. She pretended to walk far away, and quietly turned back to take a look. When Inyina's aura was completely gone, Jiang Pingji jumped off the rockery with ease. The ventilation there was smooth. The aura left by the couple's mischief was so weak that it was almost undetectable. However, for Jiang Pingji, whose 5 senses were different from ordinary people, her nose was filled with a strange smell. She frowned slightly, and there was some disgust and contempt in her eyes. She slightly controlled her 5 senses, and the nauseating aura became much lighter. She took off another perfume pouch from her waist and sniffed it gently. Only then did she feel better. Wu Majun and Inyina left one after another. Jiang Pingji chose another winding path, and left the rockery after making several turns. It was a special day. The garden, which was usually quiet, was more lively. Many noble ladies, who were gorgeously dressed and exquisitely dressed, were touring the garden together. Their eyebrows or foreheads were decorated with delicate red flower ornaments. The bright red color made the skin around them look even fairer and more delicate. The current atmosphere in Dongqing was not too closed. Although men and women touring together would be criticized, it was not a big deal. Therefore, apart from these noble ladies who were more beautiful than flowers, there were many young men in elegant clothes in the garden, beside the waterside pavilion, and in the gazebo. Out of tacit understanding, both parties were clearly separated. Even if they were familiar with each other, they would only look at each other from afar, separated by a small forest or a cluster of flowers. They would quickly look away. The evaluation day was not only related to the future of the noble son's officialdom, but it might also affect their marriage. Jiang Pingji was naturally a noble son, but she was still young. She was still young and small in stature, but her facial features were very distinctive. She was more feminine, yet full of heroic spirit. After a few years, when she had completely grown up and gained some scholarly honors and fame, this was the image of a husband in the eyes of many aristocratic ladies. The most important thing was that she had to be handsome. It was not masculine, but a beauty that was mixed with the gentleness of a woman. It was best if her gender was indistinguishable. Not only that, her figure had to be tall and thin. Her temperament had to be as gentle as jade, and she had to treat people gently. She had to be knowledgeable and talented. Avoiding the path that the noble ladies took, Jiang Pingji looked around, and went to the octagonal pavilion that was on a higher ground. Standing there and looking into the distance, those with better eyesight could see the scholars who were participating in the evaluation. When she went over, there were already 3 unfamiliar men sitting in the octagonal pavilion. Jiang Pingji did not know them, so she just nodded politely. They did not mind Jiang Pingji coming over to disturb them. Instead, they smiled and turned their heads to continue chatting with their friends. The fallen petals were in profusion. The falling petals moved with the wind and covered the ground. Hundreds of scholars were scattered along the riverside and in the small forest. Graceful maids shuttled back and forth while carrying fine wine and delicacies. Occasionally, the sound of elegant music could be heard. Jiang Pingji and the audience in the streaming room were silent. Their expressions were subtle. How could this be called an examination? Oh no, this was an evaluation. Lao Siji Lianmeng. I probably went to a fake school. Shaoxiang Huasher Si Lu Si. I probably met a group of fake teachers. Sans Hisong Shiningsher. I probably did a bunch of fake test papers. Bingtang Lemon Guitang. I probably entered a fake examination hall. Jiang Pingji. Separated by such a distance, others could only see a blurry figure. But it was different for Jiang Pingji. She could see all kinds of people. At that moment, Wei Si's bun was slightly different. He raised his hand and touched it. A blooming beauty sleep fell on top of his head. The beauty sleep only bloomed in autumn and winter. The colder it was, the more beautiful it was when it bloomed. Its fragrance assailed one's nostrils. He looked at the flower and was slightly lost in thought. Not knowing what he was recalling, his expression became a little bitter. At that moment, he seemed to have sensed someone's gaze. He quietly looked over. Even though he could only see a blurry figure, how could he not recognize it? Chapter 294. Although Dongqing's aristocratic families were becoming more and more outrageous, it was undeniable that the children from those aristocratic families were indeed capable. There will always be talented people in every generation. Sigh, it's really one wave pushing the other. These young people are really amazing. They are all the pillars of the country. The deputy examiner beside Lu Shi sighed with emotion. The other examiners echoed in unison. Why else would they say that they are young talents? The world today will soon be theirs. It's good to be young. In a few years, perhaps old bones like us will have to give up our positions to the more capable. Nowadays, these young juniors really make one envious. A great scholar spoke. His sideburns were white, and his face was full of wrinkles. However, his skin was rosy and he was full of vigor. The triennial assessment was a very important day for Dongqing. Although Lu Shi was the general examiner, there were more than 10 deputy examiners beside him. They were either old ministers in the court, famous scholars or learned scholars. Every one of them had more experience than Lu Shi. However, Lu Shi hated it when they took advantage of their seniority. Listening to the few of them sighing, he secretly clicked his tongue in his heart. Then he sneered coldly. Even a pig would have 2 hooves to walk when a large amount of resources was thrown at it, let alone a human. The other assessments were almost done one after another. The atmosphere was also heated up. Under the urging of a few deputy examiners, Lu Shi got up from the couch. Then he took out a scroll from his sleeve. 2 maids came forward and removed the seal on the scroll. They unfolded it and hung it on the shelf. Seeing that scroll, all the scholars had already perked up. The highlight of the day's assessment was coming. When they saw the big word on the scroll, they were all stunned. They either frowned in deep thought or secretly muttered, "People." That was the only word on the scroll. It was also the topic of the assessment this time. In layman's terms, it was a written essay with a topic. The examiner gave the topic, and the students answered it freely. There was no limit to the number of words, the format of the content, and the theme of the article. As long as the topic was closely related to the people, be it governance of the people, farming, commodity trading, or education, it would not be considered as going off topic. It seemed simple, but in fact it was very difficult to deal with. First of all, the topic was too broad. There were many things that could be written. Because of this, it was too difficult to write something that was brilliant, incisive, thought-provoking, or to be praised by Lu Shi. Most of the time, it was better to be neutral. Secondly, Most of them were sons of aristocratic families with excellent family backgrounds. Although they did not talk about politics, they also did not have much contact with the common people. Most of what they knew came from books. If they were not careful, they could easily write false information. How could they enter the topic? To them, handing in the mission wasn't difficult. What was difficult was how to stand out and suppress the others. Of course, Jiang Pingji also saw the question. She frowned. Lu Shi's test question could be said to be easy, but it could also be said to be too difficult. It was indeed a bit tricky. Men, the characters follow the corpse and follow the clan. Corpse meant that the body was unable to move, and by extension, it meant that the body could not migrate or move. Sure meant country and clan. When the two were combined, it was the people. If one thought about it in a divergent way, men could not only be interpreted as the common people, but also as the national economy and the people's livelihood. From the connection between the two, the basic necessities of life, food, housing, and transportation related to the people could all be included in the thinking. The national economy and the people's livelihood, such as reading and being rich in the country, could also be used as a starting point for the question. More importantly, after Lu Shi gave the question, he did not give any other hints. The students were also very confused. If they could know Lu Shi's inner bias, they would be able to think about the key points and cater to his preferences. Many of the scholars were in a difficult position. When the deputy examiners saw it, although they had objections in their hearts, they did not say it out loud. He cared about the people's livelihood, and he was pragmatic. What else could they say? Seeing the question, Wei Ci curled his lips slightly. He was very sure that there was something wrong with Lu Shi. But overall, he did not seem to be that annoying. The question had been given, and it was not convenient for the scholars to communicate and discuss. Many examiners were watching from above, so they could only rely on their own abilities. While the others were still thinking about Lu Shi's preferences, a few scholars had already started to grind the stones, lay the paper, and picked up their pens to write. Lu Shi's eyes swept around. Those who started writing were basically the candidates that he had expected. He could not help but secretly sigh in his heart. They had left their names in the annals of history based on their abilities. Naturally, there was a certain reason for that. There was no point in being envious or jealous of such talents. He walked around a little, and swept his gaze across the few people's writing desks. He could not help but nod. The question that he gave was indeed very broad, but as long as it did not deviate from the people, it would basically not stray from the topic. Rather than being greedy and wanting to state countless contents in a short space of time, which would result in the essay being empty, it was better to seize a point and focus on explaining it. Of course, it was one thing to understand the principle, but it was another thing to be able to write something substantial. Some people had already understood Lu Shi's intentions, but when they started writing, they realized that they could not write anything substantial. Based on their analysis of Lu Shi, he could be considered a practical person. What was the use of exaggerating? He might even prefer those who knew about agriculture and water conservancy, and were hardworking and capable. Of course, these people still had self-awareness. More people were disdainful. Everyone liked to listen to flattery. So what if the essay was beautifully written? As long as the general evaluation officer was comfortable reading it, it was fine. Therefore, there was no lack of fools who liked to show off their literary talent. Among the many scholars, Lu Shi cared the most about Master Yuanjing's few students and disciples. There was not much difference from what he had expected. Just from the content of the essay, he could actually feel out the temperament of these people. The only one that surprised him was Wei Ci, this fourth disciple of Master Yuanjing. It seemed that he was not like Amin had said. He only had a good face. Cheng Jing was steady and practical. He paid attention to farming and water conservancy. Han Yu was righteous and open-minded. His essay was related to the criminal law. Lu Zheng seemed to conform to the norm. But when he went deep into his essay, he pointed out the current shortcomings of Dongqing and cried out for the people. But this Wei Ci, just by looking at his appearance, he was like a jade-like person. He was cold and had a bit of gentlemanly gentleness. He was strangely harmonious. However, his article was quite spicy and pungent. Even if Lu Shi admired his essay very much, he could not give him too high a score at this juncture. That was not the way to court death. This lad seemed to naively hope that all the people in the world could study. He gave a lot of practical suggestions and plans. The corner of Lu Shi's mouth twitched. He provoked the authority of the gentry at this time. Was he not afraid of being put in a difficult position? He sighed secretly. Wei Si's deliberate act of looking for trouble was King ridiculous in Amin's eyes. However, the troubling matter was not over yet. Jiang Pingji was in the pavilion watching many scholars immerse themselves in their essays. She felt slightly comfortable. That was the atmosphere of an examination. However, she changed her opinion very quickly. Hiss! The sound of cloth tearing rang out. Wei Si was about to use the incense burner to dry the ink stains on the essay that he had written. A scholar near him was still deep in thought. His face was flushed, and his expression was a little squinted. He kept tearing at his clothes. The clothes that the scholar was wearing were old clothes. They were worn loosely. Naturally, they could not withstand such torment. Soon a big hole was torn. Wei Si was speechless. Lu Shi heard the movement and turned his head. The Langjun had already taken off his clothes. He stood up from his seat with his back facing Lu Shi. Lu Shi was speechless. Chapter 295. The clothes slid down and piled up at the feet. Everything was exposed. Naturally, everything in front of the body could be seen. The filthy thing even had the tendency to raise its head. The passing maids could not help but scream when they saw it. The scholars who were alarmed by the scream turned their heads to look for the source of the movement. The deputy examiners who liked to flaunt their seniority also stopped chatting and looked up. All of a sudden, they felt like they were going blind. It was fine for the men. They had the parts that others had. So what if they saw it? At most, they would feel that it was an eyesore and spit at it for being immoral. However, the maids were different. They entered the royal palace. Strictly speaking, they were the emperor's women. Now that they saw the body of another strange man, and they were all virgins, they were suddenly frightened and screamed. It was already good of them to not be in a mess. Lu Shi's face was livid. When he saw the scholar's smug expression, he immediately guessed what was going on. The audience in the streaming room took advantage of the camera angle and zoomed in to see the situation of the assessment clearly. Just as they were picking and choosing and sucking up to all kinds of handsome men, the naked Langjun occupied most of the screen. White and plump breasts, slender waist, white and skinny legs that were a little blue. The audience in the streaming room. The sparse bullet screen instantly became turbulent, and the overwhelming number of words blocked the virtual screen. Lianizi Huaji. Oh my god, my eyes are going blind. Zaifengjin Bao Bao. It's too much. My mother was watching the streaming just now. Suddenly, a high-definition breasts appeared. Now she suspects that I'm watching something dirty. She's going to the balcony to hit me with a clothes hanger. Help. Inyang Zuanshang. I'm the one who's miserable. My wife is starting to doubt my sexual orientation. Apart from these complaints and ridicule, the others were all copied and pasted to protect their eyes. Jiang Pengji was almost dumbfounded. She had just listened to an action blockbuster on the rockery. Now she came to peek at the assessment and encountered someone tearing his clothes and wanting to run away. She must have seen a fake assessment. The panic over there also attracted the attention of many people. They all ran to the octagonal pavilion to secretly see what was going on. As the person involved and the culprit of everything, the scholar was not ashamed. Instead, he was proud. The embarrassment and panic of the maids around him greatly pleased him. He threw his head back and laughed, blushing. All living beings come naked. This is their nature. Why are you all so alarmed? Wei Si snorted coldly and said harshly, Children are young and don't know shame. Are you the same? Etiquette, justice, honor, shame, and trust have been cultivated to perfection. That person heard Wei Si's sarcasm and turned his head to take a look. While this was really amazing, he felt as if he heard the sound of his heart blossoming. It was incomparably wonderful. The scholar squinted his eyes and his footsteps floated as he approached Wei Ci with a chuckle. I really didn't know that in this mediocre world, there's actually such a heavenly beauty. When I saw you, Lang Jun, I felt as if I had known you before. As if you were an old friend from Mount Wu. You look very familiar. Can we be like brothers? In layman's terms, it was, brother. I think we've had fun in our dreams before. Can we still go on a date? Nowadays, the Southern style was prevalent in Dongqing. There were many Qi brothers, and many scholars even regarded it as a fashion. However, there were still many straight men in the world. They were rather disgusted by such actions that went against yin and yang, due to the orthodox public opinion of the harmony of yin and yang. Although there were many sworn brothers, most of them would do it in secret. Very few of them would confess their love to another man in public. Not to mention that after eating too much of the hanqi powder, one's brain would turn over, and one's clothes would be taken off. One would flirt with someone of the same gender. Wei Ci's expression was completely unsightly. What did it mean to be an old friend from Mount Wu? Did he still want to be like brothers? The seats of all the scholars were fixed, so Master Yuanjing's students and disciples did not gather together. Hearing the commotion and seeing that Wei Ci was actually being teased by a libertine who had taken drugs, his face instantly darkened, and he was very angry. Who would have thought that someone would be so daring to take hanqi powder at the assessment site? It was fine if he used it, but he was so excited that he forgot where he was. This was the place for assessment, not an ordinary gathering. Although he was angry, if Wei Ci was really offended and taken advantage of by this fellow, how would his reputation be in the future? Thinking of this, a few scholars from Langyi Academy went forward to stop him. However, they were quite far away from him. The scholar who was high was only 3 to 4 steps away from Wei Ci. Comparing them, it was obvious who would be the first to seduce Wei Ci. Lu Shi was so angry that his eyes were filled with murderous intent. He clenched his teeth and said, "Guards, take this person away." In order not to disturb the scholar's assessment, the guards who were an eyesore were all waiting outside. It would take some time for them to come in. Wei Ci restrained the anger on his face. His gaze was cold as if he was looking at a dead person. With a cold face, he stood up, picked up the writing table with both hands, and swung it directly at the scholar. He did it in one go. Everyone was speechless. Wei Ci looked down and said, "Immoral." His hand was still holding onto the writing table. No, it should be said that half of the writing table, and the other half was hanging on the scholar's face. Looking at the broken writing table, then looking at the scholar's face that was covered in blood, many people secretly shuddered. If the writing table had been smashed on their faces, wouldn't their faces be flattened, so that even their parents wouldn't be able to recognize them? Wei Ci's fingernails were neatly trimmed, but because he used too much force, his fingertips were pale. His fingers used force, and his knuckles were distinct. The veins on the back of his hands were bulging. It was obvious that his heart was not as calm as he looked. At this moment the guards rushed over. Wei Ci raised his head and glanced at Lu Shi and the scholars. He bowed with a calm expression, pursed his lips and left with a wave of his sleeves. He was very clear that there was no need for him to stay. Even if there was a reason for hitting someone during the assessment, it was very likely that he would be disqualified. Rather than continuing to stay and becoming a laughing stock, it was better to leave quickly to avoid being bullied and humiliated. Lu Shi bent over to pick up Wei Ci's answer paper. Because the ink had not completely dried, and the ink on the inkstone on the writing table had spilled, a lot of the content was dyed black. Lu Shi shook the paper, and took the incense burner to dry the ink. "Tsk, what a pity." Lu Shi pointed at the scholar coldly. "Drag this disgraceful person away." Wei Ci was at least high-spirited, and took the initiative to leave. However, the scholar who made a mistake and caused trouble was personally ordered by Lu Shi to drag him away. Comparing the two, no one would be bothered about Wei Ci injuring someone. They would only feel pity that the child was unlucky. This was only one of the reasons. More importantly, Lu Shi's action had almost negated everything about the scholar. His scholarly reputation was completely ruined. After being hit in the face with the writing table, the intense pain caused the scholar's light-headed head to return to the human world from heaven. There was still a pleasant aftertaste in his body. However, when he saw everything around him clearly and the cold wind blew, he realized that he was naked and almost fainted. You're tuning in to the Lee May's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.